The soldiers of the 108th Regiment received their orders to head to the battlefield. They were marching straight into a slaughter, but they didn't know it yet. They buried themselves deep in the snow just to move without being seen. It wasn't disobedience. It was the Indian reconnaissance planes circling overhead. Any movement would give them away, but staying still meant freezing to death in the ice. Right then, a massive roar shattered the silence. Dozens of supersonic fighter jets tore through the sky in an instant. Then, a rain of Pili missiles began to fall from the clouds. The enemy pilot was still trying to process what he saw when a blast hit him head-on. He was vaporized into nothing but scrap metal. Watching the radar screen, I couldn't help but feel a rush of pure adrenaline. I had finally rewritten history after traveling back 16 months with my R&D system. I didn't just quit my old life, I felt alive for the first time. I walked away from the chance to study at the prestigious Zion Military School. Instead, I chose a different path entirely. I became a researcher at a ruined ice factory, turning it into my secret laboratory. Did anyone realize how desperate the situation in Sayagwo really was back then? The rare Jingjian resources were vanishing fast. The enemy was watching us with greedy eyes, waiting for the moment to strike. I knew the upcoming Yuan Dynasty War would cause even more casualties if I didn't act. Then there's the laser disaster that has dragged on for years. I have to make Sayagwo strong as fast as possible for the people who helped me. I won't let millions of Sayagwoan citizens be crushed again. I stood there in the factory courtyard, lost in these thoughts. The cold from the ice factory bit at me, but I didn't flinch. I couldn't help but clench my fists in secret. Suddenly, a truck roared into the yard with a heavy thud. A factory master with graying hair stepped out and shouted to the group. "All of you are top-tier students," he began. "You just returned from studying abroad these past 2 days. I'm sure you recognize the famous Katyusha rocket behind me. And to the right is our own Type 3 R&D imitation rocket. But to be honest, the performance is nowhere near where it needs to be. Compared to the Katyusha, our tech's impact on the market is a joke. Its contribution to our army's combat effectiveness is extremely limited." The faces of the 8 young men standing in the courtyard darkened. None of them wanted to see their own country falling behind like this. A few of them couldn't hold back their frustration anymore. They started whispering. "Our industrial base was weak from the start. We've endured years of war. Catching up is just too difficult. Developing a Type 3 right now is a massive challenge. We still have a long way to go before we can match the Katyusha's pace." I stood there, just another student who had returned from studying in Xinjiang. I knew the Indian organ rocket was even stronger than the Shaun Katyusha. Thinking about how far ahead they were felt absolutely hopeless. Once the last student finished speaking, every eye in the courtyard was filled with a heavy, bitter frustration. I watched Master Wang step forward again, his voice booming over the crowd. He spoke loudly about the dire state of our country's technological lag. Our rocket program was falling apart at the seams. He mentioned Vice Commander-in-Chief Gao of the Army. The Jianzhou Field Army had issued a direct, personal order. Our factory was tasked with using the Type 3 as a foundation for new research. We had to develop rockets with a much higher ceiling. Advanced tech was no longer optional. The performance had to match the Katyusha. The final report and inspection were due in just 1 month. Hearing this, a surge of excitement shot through me. I had already awakened the violent R&D system. I had the blueprints for the Type 191 long-range rocket and the Type 99 main battle tank. Even supersonic fighter jets were within my reach now. If I have enough points, even the Kumpan aerospace carrier is within my reach. I didn't expect the opportunity for research and development to come so soon. It was time to get to work. I decided to start with the Type 191 rocket. To make the most of our history and our resources, Master Wang wanted to tap into everyone's creativity. He asked us to divide into several independent research groups. We were to carry out our own development projects immediately. I looked at Master Wang, ready to ask him a question. I wanted to know if I could work in a group all by myself. Before I could speak, a beautiful girl suddenly asked, "Can I be in a group with you?" Her name was Chu Beiwei, a fellow student who had studied abroad with me. I hesitated and asked, "I remember you were always top of the class in materials science." "Only once was I second," she said with a flash of pride, "and that was my own mistake." I nodded reluctantly, thinking it might be useful to have a materials expert around. She noticed my hesitation and raised a small fist, promising to show me her skills. The groups were finalized quickly, and the division of labor was set. It was officially decided that our group would handle the rocket launcher testing. I watched Master Wang walk away, my mind already racing with plans. My gaze drifted as I recalled the technical details from my memory. I remembered crossing the Ash River. I had returned from Europe 10 months later, the memories still sharp. I knew we only had a minute to spare before the next phase. Starting next month, things were going to get intense. Chu Beiwei nodded in agreement, but I just gave her a side eye and gestured for her to follow. I walked quickly toward the row of research and investment areas. As we walked, Chu Beiwei suddenly asked, "How were your grades when you studied with the Bears?" I shrugged and told her the truth. I was usually second to last. She froze instantly, wondering how someone with such bad grades could handle R&D. She probably thought she'd have to carry the entire project herself. Feeling like she'd stepped onto a sinking ship, she hurried to catch up with me. She asked again, "Aside from getting materials, what else do you need me for?" I stopped, pointed at the testing field, and said, "Stop standing there like an idiot." I told her we needed to go inside and take a look at the equipment. Seeing me stare at the machines, she reminded me, "These tools are basically scrap metal." She explained that Master Wong and the others had already picked the best ones for the factory. If we needed to use the good machines, we'd have to wait for factory approval and adjustments. I didn't bother answering her. I just walked over and started clearing out a workspace. I didn't need her permission, I needed results. We had to move fast. I focused entirely on the design. When he was on the verge of death, he went to his father's house. I turned around to face the task ahead. Chu Beiwei remembered something and gave me a warning. "By the way, I'll ask for someone to accompany you in the next video," she said. I had borrowed a set of blueprints from a previous life. I sent the specs for rockets 1 through 3 to Wan Shifu. After all, we had to improve based on their foundation. Having the blueprints would make everything much easier. I wasn't going to just accept things as they were. Maybe this was the confidence of an academic slacker, but I knew the difficulties ahead. Within minutes, she brought a huge stack of drafts, and I grabbed the pen. I started sketching the design across the table without a care in the world. Chu Beiwei saw I wasn't being subtle and started drawing on the layout herself. After hundreds of sketches, Zhang Yun began his own design work. I was completely immersed in the ocean of military science and technology. Then, I heard the sharp, clear voice of the system in my head. The system detected that the host was ready to begin. I started developing the Caceres rocket launcher, the Type 100 long-range low-altitude model. The integration of scientific knowledge began. The system consumed 500 ID points for the related technology. Then, a massive wave of technical data hit me like a tsunami. It exploded in my mind, leaving me with almost no time to think. I moved fast, sketching the missing core of the design. The final piece of the puzzle was falling into place. At that moment, Chu Beiwei looked up from her own work. Her smile froze as she saw my draft and asked, "What on earth are you drawing?" I pointed at the blueprint and started explaining the serious details. I showed her the fuel tank and the oxidizer tank. I explained how high-pressure combustion in the chamber produces high-temperature gas. The high pressure uses the principle of momentum to generate massive thrust. Chu Beiwei's expression went stiff because she didn't understand a single word. She forced a nervous laugh and tried to play it off. She quickly changed the subject, asking, "What is this little ball? Do rockets even have these?" I told her it was a gyroscope for inertial guidance, a 3-axis stabilizer. If you want a rocket to hit its target with precision, you can't leave this out. It's the brain of the entire flight path. Hearing this, Chu Beiwei finally lost her composure. She muttered, "We're both students here, so why does it feel like you're studying a different universe? What even is a gyroscope?" I had no idea. I ignored her stunned expression and kept my head down, writing. I designed at lightning speed until the table was buried under a thick layer of drafts. Watching this, Chu Beiwei smiled, feeling like she had truly found a hidden treasure tonight. Finally, my pen came to a halt as I finished the very last line. I stood up and stretched my neck, knowing what came next. It was time for the preparatory work before the actual manufacturing. The public machine tools at the weapons factory weren't going to cut it. They couldn't meet the precision requirements for the 191 rocket launcher. I stood up and scanned the room until my gaze finally locked onto a target. It was an imported F&K universal lathe from Hans Cat. This specific machine tool was exactly what I needed for the job. It looked like a rusted hunk of junk, but a closer look revealed the truth. The rust hadn't reached the interior, and the external damage was actually quite minor. I grabbed a wrench and decided to handle the repairs myself. With the system's blessing, I now possessed max-level mechanical repair skills. With a series of lightning-fast movements, I worked on the F&K universal lathe. Slowly but surely, it began to regain its former glory. Chu Beiwei watched from the side with her eyes wide in disbelief. She wondered why a fellow student from the Big Dipper possessed skills their masters couldn't even teach. I started by repairing the drive belt. Fixing a lathe requires deep mechanical knowledge, especially one this size. Could I really be self-taught? Chu Beiwei looked more confused by the second. I finished the repairs and modifications in just under an hour. I plugged the lathe into the power outlet right under the camera's lens. Chu Beiwei didn't blink, her eyes glued to my every move. The machine roared to life, kicking up a small cloud of dust as the green status light flickered on. It was running perfectly, leaving Chu Beiwei staring in stunned silence. She snapped out of it and handed me a lunchbox. "Eat something first," she said. "It's already getting cold." We both ate quickly to save time. I moved on to the next task immediately. I transformed the damaged ceiling lift into a high-quality hoist system. It was now essentially a functioning mobile crane. I took a deep breath. It was rudimentary, but it was enough to start building. I grabbed a pen, scribbled down a list of materials, and handed it to Chu Beiwei. "Check this list," I told her. "These are the materials we need." Her head spun as she looked at the dense list of parts. I ignored her hesitation and asked if the testing materials were ready. She confirmed they were, and I gave her a sharp, determined nod. I told her today's materials were set, but she needed to prep the next batch for tomorrow. I handed her the list, and Chu Beiwei's wide eyes nearly popped out of her head. She stared at the requirements in shock. The research and development phase began, moving at a tense, orderly pace. I handled every single detail myself, from the precision cutting to the drilling and final assembly. My goal was clear: simplify the build without sacrificing a shred of performance. For the Type 190 box-type remote rocket launcher, I realized that even with the same design, the material quality was the only limit. I worked through the cooling blocks one by one. I meticulously fitted each water block into the system. It was repetitive, grueling work, block after block. I managed to simplify the Type 191 launcher's frame while keeping its core power intact. By now, Chu Beiwei didn't have a single doubt left about my abilities. She took over everything else, from chores to heavy lifting, as 2 weeks flew by. Finally, the high-explosive pump body was completed to exact specifications. Next, I had to start fabricating the launch platform itself. Suddenly, Chu Beiwei came bursting through the workshop door. She was breathless, telling me Vice Commander Gao was coming to inspect us personally. He would be arriving shortly to observe my progress. The brigade commander even sent word that he was increasing the security detail. The rewards were on the line for whichever group succeeded in their task. The lead researchers could be promoted directly to senior engineers, and I saw Chu Beiwei's eyes light up. Becoming a senior engineer this early would change a student's entire life. I knew our cutting-edge manufacturing had to leave the inspectors absolutely dazzled. I worked overtime every single day, grinding through the remaining parts until the very last moment. The night before the test, I finally finished the assembly. Chu Beiwei looked at me, her face full of anxiety, and asked, "Will we make it in time?" "Don't worry," I told her. "Go to the testing site tomorrow and report for Group 3. I'll be right behind you." Chu Beiwei nodded, realizing that was our only option. The next morning, Master Wang led the research and development teams to the weapons factory range. Over 100 new recruits were training at the range as Wang Shihong arrived on the field. He turned around and noticed Chu Beiwei looking incredibly restless. He lowered his voice and said, "Tell your uncle the truth. Did the research fail?" "It doesn't matter if we failed," he added. "The most important thing is to be honest. When it's our turn to test, I know Brother Zan will be here," Chu Beiwei insisted. She kept glancing toward the nearby intersection, her nerves getting the better of her. Her palms were dripping with sweat. Deep down, she wasn't actually sure if I would show up. Master Wang nodded, noting that Groups 1 and 2 had succeeded, so Group 3's failure wouldn't hurt much. Just as they were speaking, an all-terrain vehicle appeared in the distance. The military all-terrain jeep screeched to a halt at the firing range. 2 men in their 50s stepped out and walked toward the group. They moved with a steady, disciplined rhythm. Master Wang and the others rushed forward to greet them immediately. "Commander Gao, Commander Zhao, the testing team is ready," he announced. Vice Commander Gao didn't waste a second and signaled for the test to begin. Group 1 was up first. Their leader, CAI, stepped up brimming with confidence and revealed his modified Type 13 rocket launcher. The frame was significantly bulkier than the standard model, with a much wider launch muzzle. He had even increased the capacity from 6 rounds to 10. Master Wang whispered to the commanders that CAI was a top student who had studied advanced mechanics in the UK. Gao's expression remained stone cold as he looked at the weapon, giving only a slight, indifferent nod. The preparations were finished, and CAI slammed his finger down on the launch button. A massive wave of force erupted from the launcher. Thick smoke billowed out from the mechanical joints of the device. "Comrade," Gao said, his voice dropping an octave. "Look at the target clearly." CAI froze, stammering, "That's impossible. I modified everything exactly how my British professor taught me. How could it miss by that much? I followed the University of Madrid textbooks to the letter." But the truth was undeniable. The projectile had veered wildly off course to the east. The expressions on the faces of the 2 teammates beside him were grim. Zhao Chang'an tried to offer some comfort after the total failure. "Failure is the mother of success," he said. "Let the second group begin." While Juzhen watched as someone even more skilled than him failed, and his nerves spiked. 2 members of the next team stepped forward. They hauled out the rocket launcher they had modified. The shape hadn't changed much from the original model, except the launch muzzle had been expanded to hold 12 rounds. The caliber had been altered from the original 102mm down to 98mm. I felt a chill in my heart as I looked at the weapon. Being a veteran of the ice factory, I could see the flaws with a single glance. I could tell this was going to be even worse than the first group. Sure enough, all 12 rockets veered wildly away from the zone. They didn't even come close to hitting the target. The projectiles scattered across the field like lost toys. Every single one of them missed. As for the firepower, the combined impact wasn't even comparable to a pile of hand grenades. Zhao Chang'an's expression darkened even further. He wanted to show off the ice factory's strength to his old friend, but this was a disaster. It was a total slap in the face. Vice Commander Gao couldn't help but let out a laugh. He mocked us, saying our research and development wasn't going very well. Zhao Chang'an's mouth twitched as he told Gao not to jump to conclusions. He barked for the third group to begin their test immediately. Wang Shifu looked uncomfortable and glanced toward a small figure in the crowd. Chu Beiwei shrank back, her small hands clenched tight and her breathing shallow. She was panicking, wondering why her brother hadn't arrived yet. Wang Shifu noticed her distress and stepped forward to speak to Zhao Chang'an. He explained that the leader of the third group, Zhang Yun, wasn't there yet. He claimed Zhang Yun had worked all night and would be arriving shortly. I felt my heart sink completely when I heard that. If they didn't even have a finished product, what was there to expect? Lu Zhan, still bitter over his own failure, decided to vent his frustration. He pointed out that no one had seen the third group use the machine tools all month. He sneered, betting that Zhang Yun wouldn't show up at all. Every eye in the place suddenly turned toward Lu Juzhen for confirmation. If they hadn't used the tools, they hadn't even finished the design phase. Under the weight of 100 stares, Lu Zhen simply nodded in agreement. Zhao Chang'an's face went from disappointed to pure, cold fury. Even Vice Commander Gao's face darkened as he watched the scene unfold. Chu Beiwei looked like she was about to burst into tears from the unfairness of it all. She insisted that Zhang Yun had repaired the FNK Universal Lathe himself. She begged them to wait, swearing our R&D was almost finished and he would arrive. Master Wang just smirked, realizing he didn't even need to point out how ridiculous that sounded. He started muttering under his breath about the complexity of that imported machine. He claimed even the original factory couldn't fix a scrapped FNK, let alone some kid. Chu Beiwei didn't back down. She ignored him and kept her eyes fixed on the entrance. She turned to Master Wang and told him every word she said was the absolute truth. She challenged him to go to the workshop and see the machine with his own eyes. She declared that if she was telling even a single lie, she would resign immediately. She was willing to leave the weapons factory forever and never touch another project. She was certain Zhang Yun was already on his way. She just needed them to wait 5 more minutes. The air in the room grew heavy as everyone realized she wasn't bluffing. Master Wang hesitated, looking toward Commander Zhao for a final decision. Zhao thought it over before asking Vice Commander Gao to give it a few more minutes. The crowd fell into a suffocating silence as the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Master Wang snorted, whispering that stalling wouldn't turn a lie into the truth. Lu Zhen looked at Master Wang and let out a long, slow sigh of relief. Chu Beiwei's nerves were stretched to the breaking point, her heart racing in her throat. I just needed to hurry up and get there. Commander Zhao glanced down at his watch again. He looked out at the long, stretching road, but it was still completely empty. His eyes filled with disappointment as he started to say, "Forget it, Gao." He was mid-sentence when a violent, mechanical roar suddenly tore through the air. Everyone froze and whipped their heads toward the source of the noise. They saw a massive vehicle charging toward them from the distance. It was a modified 6-wheeled beast in military green, weighing well over a ton. As it got closer, it revealed 2 massive, sharp 5-tube rocket launchers mounted on the back. The crowd stood stunned, wondering where such a terrifying weapon had come from. Vice Commander Gao instinctively reached for the holster at his hip. His eyes were sharp, filled with a sudden, high-alert intensity. Commander Zhao felt the impact of the machine's presence hit him like a physical blow. The wave of air coming off the vehicle felt like the breath of a wild beast. Terrified, he instinctively stepped back, trying to put distance between himself and the machine. The vehicle screeched to a halt right in front of the group. The people around finally snapped out of their shock as they looked toward the cabin. They saw my face through the glass, looking calm as I sat in the driver's seat. Everyone rushed toward the vehicle, even the soldiers who had been in the middle of drills. Soldiers from the nearby shooting range ran over, shouting with curiosity. Questions and murmurs began to echo from every direction. I heard them whispering, "What kind of steel monster is this?" Others wondered if Group 3 had developed a rocket launcher this advanced. The machine was massive, making anyone standing near the tires feel tiny. It was like being an ant stared down by a giant from above. I had seen plenty of heavy artillery back at the factory, but none of them had an aura this imposing or impressive. I pulled the handbrake, letting out a sharp, metallic screech. I threw the door open and jumped down to the ground. Chu Beiwei rushed toward me immediately. I saw the lingering traces of tears in her eyes as she tried to speak. Looking at her face, I could guess exactly what she had been through. I reached out and gently ruffled her hair to calm her down. I realized then that I wasn't the only one who had been under pressure. Then it hit me that such a gesture might be a bit too intimate for the moment. I quickly pulled my hand back and said, "Beiwei, sorry for the wait." Her expression softened as I added, "It doesn't matter, I made it just in time." I nodded toward the field and said, "Come on, it's time for our test." We walked quickly toward Vice Commander Gao and the rest of the officials. Right then, the eyes of the Vice Commander of the Republic's prosecution, Dante Gao, were filled with absolute shock. His mind simply couldn't process what he was seeing. Vice Commander Gao muttered under his breath, "Oldly, this is quite the surprise you've prepared for me." Commander Zhao didn't respond to the Vice Commander immediately. He just stared at Dante Gao with a stunned expression. Then he turned to Li Shifu, his face twisting with disbelief. After hesitating for a moment, he asked in a low voice, "Oldly, what's the deal with this rocket launcher? Did you help him develop and manufacture this in secret?" Li Shifu gave a bitter, forced smile and replied, "Commander, don't joke with me. Just looking at this rugged, massive frame, not even 10 of me could have pulled this off. Maybe, just maybe it really was developed by Xiao Chun." The commander stared at the vehicle again and repeated, "Oldly, what is this?" Li Shifu shook his head. "I'm serious. Commander, look at that build. 10 of me wouldn't be enough to design something that powerful." Even as he said it, Li Shifu himself struggled to believe his own words. Could a single student really have created a machine that looked this lethal? I had just returned from abroad, with no help and no factory tools, yet I built this beast. Commander Zhao had traveled all the way to Guangzhou just to inspect the troops. But right now, he was thinking the exact same thing as Li Shifu. I watched as Chu Beiwei and I approached the command table. The commander's eyes remained fixed on the ground as we drew near. Then, his expression shifted slightly as Li Shifu stepped forward. Li Shifu grabbed my arm with an intensity one hadn't seen before. He looked me straight in the eye. I thought, just tell the truth and get it over with. Where did this thing come from? You're the one who knows the R&D details. I was the one who personally organized this entire development task. The research is done, and now it's time for the live fire test. I looked at Li Shifu's sudden hesitation and wondered what he was worried about. Chu Beiwei gave Li Shifu a quick wink and told him to start. Fine, let's just run the test, Li Shifu said, nodding slowly. The announcement rang out for the third group leader to step up. Group Chinja, begin the testing phase immediately. I stood my ground for a second, not moving toward the vehicle just yet. Instead of climbing in to start the trial, I turned back to Li Shifu. A 10-mile target? That's a bit too close, don't you think? I looked at him and asked, is there a target further out than that? Li Shifu shook his head, signaling that there wasn't. He pointed toward the horizon, deep into the distance. Target number 2 over there is 20 miles out. You can try for that one. I just stood there, weighing my options. I scratched my head, feeling like even 20 miles was a bit short-sighted. Is there a target at 300 miles? I asked calmly. Li Shifu froze, staring at me as if he'd misheard the number entirely. If this thing could hit 300 miles, calling it a rocket launcher would be an insult. I could see it in his eyes. He thought I was becoming more unpredictable by the second. Commander Zhao watched me with a new spark of interest in his gaze. If this weapon really could reach 300 miles, it would change everything for our troops. The soldiers stationed on the remote border islands would finally be able to breathe easy. The other students nearby overheard me, and their jaws hit the floor. One of them, Wang Kai, suddenly slapped his thigh as a realization struck him. He leaned in and whispered to his teammate, I figured it out. That rocket launcher from the third group is nothing but a hollow prop. It's just a thin layer of iron sheet metal that can't actually hit a thing. He scoffed, convinced that a 300-mile range was a total fantasy. He thought I was just bluffing to save face. It's impossible for me to be wrong about this. I watched as the confusion on their faces grew. The platform could easily be built like that, completely hollow on the inside. It looked superficial and entirely impractical for real combat. The rest of the team finally seemed to realize what was happening today. In that instant, before they were fully exposed, they scrambled for an excuse. They tried to dismiss it as immature technology that still needed work. They claimed it needed more R&D, but I knew they were just trying to deceive us. Could it really hit 300 miles? In science, you have to respect the actual level of tech. That's the reality. If we're lagging behind, we have to admit it. We should learn with humility instead of relying on empty tricks. Even though they kept their voices low, everyone nearby heard them clearly. Li Shifu looked at me, his face clouded with worry. He stared at me and asked, Xiao Chun, can this launcher really fire that far? I paused for a second, checking the bomb module I had just detached. With this 1,300mm caliber body, the max range is exactly 150 kilometers. That translates to exactly 300 miles in our standard units. But if I were to swap this out for a 475mm caliber instead, with that specific module, the range would jump to 500 kilometers. Every single person in the room froze, staring at me in dead silence. Countless pairs of eyes were locked onto me. I felt the weight of their gaze as I moved. They watched my every step, waiting for me to slip up. Inside, I knew you can't just bluff about something like this. The entire distance from the north to the south of Ginzhou spans more than 3,000 miles. If my claims were true, placing a launcher in the center would be a masterpiece. The firepower would blanket almost the entirety of Ginzhou. Right there, mounted on top of those rocket launchers, we could perform every single function of a missile system. If I really had this capability, I could strike any enemy with ease. I could reach deep into the heart of the ginseng territory. Even Yang Yu looked at me, clearly unsure of what I was plotting. He wanted to believe in me unconditionally, but my words were becoming too outrageous to grasp. I frowned, realizing I hadn't expected the lack of a suitable target range. I had only prepared a single batch of specialized shells for this test. Switching to a 10-kilometer target would be a total waste of my tech. Lucy hesitated, then leaned over to whisper to Vice Marshal Xiao. She asked if we should just end the test now and wait for a better range. The Vice Marshal didn't answer her immediately, his eyes still fixed on me. His deep eyes scanned the ground beneath us. Then, he shifted his gaze toward me, Shenzhou. He sized me up with genuine interest, looking me up and down. I was wearing an old, worn-out military coat. My posture was ramrod straight, my brows sharp and imposing. I projected an air of absolute calm and razor-sharp focus. Bloodshot veins streaked his eyes as he moved his head. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, with dark circles under his eyes. His face looked rough, but he didn't give off a bad vibe. Instead, he radiated sincerity and a strange kind of innocence. Vice Marshal Xiao exhaled slowly and turned back to Lucy. I have a way to test if this launcher can really hit a target 300 miles away. The crowd went silent the moment the words left his mouth. Every eye in the place was fixed on him as Lucy spoke up with a serious expression. Vice Marshal, we haven't even started developing ballistic missiles yet. We don't have any long-range testing grounds that fit those specs. That's true, he replied, but there is an abandoned range exactly 300 miles out. The entire stretch between here and there is a strictly guarded, uninhabited zone. If we fire from here to that abandoned site, I believe it's possible. I watched him, wondering if he really wanted to push this test to the limit. Even if what he said was true, the risks were massive. What if the margin of error was too wide and the shot went wild? A stray projectile could hit civilians, and as factory director, Lucy couldn't risk that. But Vice Marshal Xiao had already committed himself to this path. Opposing him now would only cause a scene. Xiao turned to me and asked, Chun Zhu, any issues hitting a target 300 miles out? I straightened my back immediately, showing zero hesitation. Reporting to the Vice Marshal, there will be no problem at all. Good, Xiao said, nodding before looking back at the director. Well, old Lu, what do you think? If it's settled, let's run the test. Then, the Vice Marshal got to work. He used the military radio to contact the unit stationed near the abandoned range. 30 minutes later, the confirmation came through. The entire area for miles around the target site was completely clear of people. I gripped the precise military map Xiao had provided. I began performing manual calculations based on the target coordinates. I double-checked every number to ensure the trajectory was perfect. Then, I maneuvered the vehicle into the exact firing position. With the Type 19 launcher locked in place, I climbed into the driver's cabin. I rolled down the window and told Juan, Kai, and the others to back away. I warned them to stay back so the rocket's exhaust flames wouldn't scorch them. If anything went wrong, I'd be the one forced to take the heat. Juan and Kai crossed their arms and retreated, snorting with arrogant confidence. They were certain that when the moment came, I'd lose my nerve. They were just waiting for a mistake to cause a total launch failure. Zhou looked solemn and muttered, I don't think Chun Zhu is that kind of person. Juan Kai sneered, Oh Zhou, you'll eventually learn how insidious the human heart can be. Vice Marshal Xiao, Lucy, and the others also moved back. They stood hundreds of meters away from the blast zone. As they watched from a distance, the atmosphere grew heavy and tense. A strange stillness filled the air as the soldiers at the range stopped to watch the vehicle. Everyone maintained a strict safety distance. Master Juan and Director Lucy were both visibly on edge. They held their breath in unison, their bodies locked tight. Their eyes were glued to the launch site. All focus was on the machine I had built. The Type 19 rocket launcher sat there, gleaming under the sun. It was dazzling, and I realized things had finally reached the point of no return. Whether this would be a pathetic joke or a new legend, we were about to find out. Even Vice Marshal Xiao slowly clenched his fists inside his sleeves. His gaze was sharp. If this launcher really had the range I claimed, it would change everything. It would be a massive boost for our troops, but 300 meters away, the old air raid shelter told a different story. A small communications team organized by Vice Marshal Xiao had gathered inside the bunker. They were whispering casually among themselves as they waited. Squad leader, this range hasn't been used in years, one of them noted. Why are we even here? We're just sitting in the weeds. The leader snapped back, just follow your orders. Stop asking so many questions, even if the brass hasn't made things clear yet. The squad leader sounded firm, but his own eyes were filled with doubt as he whispered. To be honest, this whole assignment is a little strange. Word is, another range 300 li away is firing test rockets right at us. What are you expecting? We're just here to see if the target gets hit. We were waiting for the moment to verify if the objective was destroyed. 300 li is an impossible distance for standard heavy artillery. Most can only fire 30 li. What kind of rocket could possibly reach this far? The squad fell silent in the pitch-black shelter, waiting for the storm to break. It felt like the calm before a massive explosion. Back at the range, Jiang Ruochu's body was tense with anxiety as she sat in the vehicle. She was strapped into the passenger seat of the Type 19 long-range rocket launcher. Her beautiful face was pale with worry, her lips pressed thin as she waited for my signal. Her lips were slightly cracked from the tension. She stared at me, her beautiful eyes searching mine as if she wanted to say something. But she didn't dare speak, so I just gave her a calm, harmless smile. I wanted to put her mind at ease. If you're too scared to go, you can stay behind, I told her. Stay with Master Li and the others. The operation is simple enough for me to handle alone. I'm part of Group 3, she snapped back. How could I leave you here alone at a time like this? I'm not scared. I'm just hungry because I skipped breakfast. I smiled, but didn't call her out on the lie. Rocket launch tests are dangerous, and she was still just a young woman. The fact that she was sitting here, shoulder to shoulder with me, proved she was a qualified member. I scanned the area through the windshield and the half-open window to ensure everyone was at a safe distance. I took a deep breath and rolled the window up tight. A golden glint flashed in my eyes as I prepared for the moment of truth. I slowly raised my right hand, calmed my nerves, and pressed the launch button without a second thought. A sharp click echoed through the cabin, signaling the start of the sequence. Vice Marshal Xiao watched my every move from a distance, his eyes locked on the vehicle. In that instant, time seemed to slow down to a crawl. Everyone's nerves were at the breaking point, their pupils fixed on the launcher. 3 seconds passed, and the massive vehicle didn't move an inch. The machine sat there like a cold, dead corpse. A wave of dread instantly washed over the crowd. The launch had failed, and Vice Marshal Zhao's face twisted as his eyes began to twitch. His lips moved as if to speak, but he remained silent. The tension finally bled out of the vice marshal's muscles. He let out a soft, heavy sigh and shook his head slowly, pure disappointment written all over his face. Master Li gave a bitter smile and started walking toward the vehicle. He wanted to get Yin Yuchu and me out of there before things got worse. The new recruits watching from the sidelines realized the truth too. The great experiment had ended in a total disaster. Smirks and mocking whispers began to spread through the ranks. Zozhen let out a cold, arrogant laugh. Do you see it now? I told you so, he sneered. He started to say Group 3's launcher was just a hollow iron shell, but he froze mid-sentence. A sudden, deathly pressure descended on the field as a deafening roar tore through the sky. Projectiles erupted from the launch containers like meteors ripping through the atmosphere. They dragged orange tails of fire dozens of meters long behind them. As they screamed toward the heavens, a terrifying aura blotted out the very sun. It felt as if the end of the world had finally arrived. The very sky began to tremble. It was like a masterwork of alchemy, a force of nature unleashed. The sheer power felt like it would collapse the mountain walls outside the window, sweeping everything away in its path. The air temperature spiked several degrees, and the view grew hazy. Dust choked the air as the rocket launchers fired one after another. Every time a projectile launched, it felt like a physical blow, like a heavy iron sledgehammer slamming into everyone's chest. The thunderous roar shredded the nerves of every person watching for 30 straight seconds. 10 rockets in total. The long-range projectiles vanished completely into the clouds. As they disappeared into the distance, the field fell into a haunting silence. You could have heard a pin drop, not even the sound of breathing remained. Even heartbeats seemed to stop as everyone tried to process what they just saw. They stood there stunned, clutching their heads in disbelief. Their ears buzzed, and their scalps went numb from the shock. It felt like their cells would explode as goosebumps covered their backs. Master Li looked at me and whispered, "Our weapons factory. It's incredible." He looked at me like I was some kind of god-tier genius. Meanwhile, Zozhen's arrogant expression froze rigidly on his face. His eyes bulged out of his head. They looked like they were about to pop right out of his skull. His mouth hung so wide open, he could have swallowed the very air around him. Zozhen stood right next to me, the words he was about to say dying in his throat. He looked like he hadn't even realized what was happening. It was as if someone had stuffed his mouth with oily leaves. He couldn't spit out a single syllable. His jaw just trembled incessantly, looking like it might actually fall off. His legs buckled. In his entire life, even during his darkest days, he'd never seen anything this shocking. Thinking back to his earlier insults, his face flushed red and then turned deathly white. He looked like he wanted to find a hole to crawl into and disappear forever. Gavis stared at the missile vehicle that had just finished its volley, his face pale as a sheet. The sheer terror in his eyes was impossible to hide. His body shook with intermittent, involuntary tremors. Even Commander Zhao Fu's calm expression finally broke, replaced by a flicker of suppressed excitement. His piercing eyes remained locked on the rocket launcher shrouded in dust, refusing to look away. The new recruits watching from the sidelines let out a collective, sharp gasp. They stood there sweating buckets, their brains completely fried by the spectacle. Suddenly, one soldier reached out and violently pinched his comrade's thigh. "Ow, are you crazy? Why are you pinching me? I just wanted to see if I was dreaming." The silence broke as the crowd erupted into a roar of disbelief. Is that really just a rocket launcher? Firing a Katyusha on the range is one thing, but this is on a whole different level. With this kind of power, the old Katyusha looks like cow dung. This thing is so brutal, I almost saw my ancestors. After the initial shock wore off, Commander Zhao couldn't contain his excitement anymore. His heart was pounding like an 8-horsepower diesel engine redlining in his chest. Even if the range doesn't hit 300 miles, reaching just a few dozen would still be a massive, undeniable success. If we deployed dozens of these on the battlefield for a single volley, our morale would skyrocket. I could only imagine the look on the enemy's faces when they saw this coming. They'd be scared to death, while joy flooded the faces of Li Se and her father. They stared at me behind the wheel with such awe, it was like they were looking at a god. The weapons factory had struck gold with this new foreign student recruit. If I told anyone a rookie developed a rocket launcher this powerful, they wouldn't believe me. I sat there in the driver's seat of the Type 19 vehicle as Chu Beiwei stood frozen. It took her a long time to snap out of it, and for her pupils to focus again. The confusion in her eyes finally cleared. She turned her slender neck slightly, studying my profile from the side. Her beautiful eyes were brimming with pure admiration and intense curiosity. I had given her too many shocks today. I seemed to have the Midas touch for machinery. From fixing CNC machines to building rare, miraculous weapons, I could do it all. Now that I've built a rocket launcher this powerful, she felt something for the opposite sex for the first time. She was consumed by curiosity, wondering what kind of person I really was. I didn't pay her any mind, but I rolled down the window and shouted to Master Li nearby. "Master Li, how's the accuracy on this thing?" I asked, but he didn't answer. Deputy Director Xiao was still in the observation room, buzzing with energy. "Wait a moment," he said proactively. "The feedback from the impact zone should be coming in right now." Out at the target range, 300 miles away, the scene was absolute chaos. The battalion commander and his men had stayed in the bunker, but they weren't unscathed. They were covered in dust as they scrambled out to inspect the impact site as ordered. When they saw the state of the range, every single one of them froze in shock. The cold air rushed into their lungs as their tongues went completely numb. A lingering wave of scorching heat hit them next. Thick clouds of dust swirled around the cratered earth. The air reeked of scorched earth across half the firing range. It looked like dozens of bomber squadrons had systematically plowed the entire field. The target carriers had been reduced to ash long ago. It was a terrifying sight. The commander never expected a rocket launcher could actually hit a target 300 miles away. The precision was absolute, looking more like a natural disaster than a weapon. After a long moment of stunned silence, he finally snapped back to reality. The battalion commander hurriedly ordered his men to send a telegram reporting the results. In no time at all, an urgent military telegram was successfully dispatched. It carried the data from the recruit training firing range. The results for the untested Kodak rocket launcher module were in. A range of 500 kilometers. Master Li was itching to get out of the car. I sat at the table waiting for the leader's next instructions. I stayed obediently in my seat, not far from the vehicle. Deputy Director Xiao and the others were waiting too. The silence was heavy. Everyone was waiting for the target practice results. Under normal circumstances, the evaluation process takes time to finalize. If they had sent an ordinary telegram, it would have taken forever. Usually, you'd wait 2 hours just to get a single response back. But an urgent military telegram operates on a completely different level. It's a high-priority channel that can deliver an answer in under 5 minutes. Suddenly, a communications soldier came sprinting toward us from the city. He rushed over and handed the telegram paper directly to the director. Deputy Director Xiao gripped the paper as every eye in the place locked onto him. The atmosphere turned electric. The results were finally here. I noticed Wang nearby, looking like a man who had just crawled out of a street fight. His eyes were bloodshot and filled with a lingering, bitter resentment. His teeth were chattering, and his expression was completely frayed. He was spiraling out of control. He muttered curses under his breath, his lips trembling with every word. What if it actually launches? He hissed. The range might not even hit 3 or 4 kilometers. It'll probably just veer off course and blow up some civilians. You'll pay with your life. Zhou Zhan, standing right beside him, heard every word of that venom. He frowned, remembering the moment the rocket launcher fired into the sky. He had analyzed the exit velocity and the trajectory of the projectile's body. He noted the color of the exhaust plume, the length of the flare, and the flight attitude. He had already calculated the stability of the missile's frame. The data was already clear enough to make a determination. There was no way this rocket would only fly for a few minutes. It wouldn't fall short, it wouldn't deviate, and it certainly wouldn't hit residents. Zhou Zhan spoke up, his voice laced with a defensive edge. He wasn't about to let those insults slide. Lucy and Master Li both turned their gaze toward the deputy director. Their faces were tense, and their breathing grew heavy with anticipation. Lucy urged him on. Xiao, stop playing games. What's the result? Deputy Director Xiao began to read the contents of the telegram aloud. He scanned the telegram carefully, over and over again. The light in his eyes grew brighter with every second. The blood in his veins began to boil, heating up his entire body. His pulse was racing, and the hand holding the telegram started to shake. A wave of raw emotion surged through him. He couldn't hold it back anymore. It erupted like a tsunami. His eyes darted toward me, glowing with intensity. Zhang Yun, you did it beautifully, he shouted. The graphite rocket launcher hit the target perfectly. The objective and every building nearby were completely leveled. Master Li stood there, frozen in utter shock. The power of this launcher was many times stronger than the Katyusha. Looking at the old man's face, I could hardly believe it myself. He looked like he wanted to jump for joy. He looked like he wanted to scream at the top of his lungs. This is too good, Lao Wang, he yelled to the chief. The head of our weapons factory is a genius. Yes, director, came the reply. If we mass-produce this, it will change everything for the frontline soldiers. Master Li was also caught up in the frenzy. He was grinning from ear to ear, knowing this success belonged to our weapons factory. Developing such powerful equipment would bring massive benefits to the entire industry. The weapons division was about to see a major upgrade, and he might even get a share of the credit for overseeing it. Everyone looked impressed, and Vice Commander Xiao nodded in agreement. The gear I developed, if used correctly, could play a decisive role on the battlefield. It had the power to completely reverse the tide of the war. Let's go, the Vice Commander said. Let's go meet our hero, the muscle behind this project. Vice Commander Xiao led the way, followed by Master Li and the others. A large group of officials and officers trailed behind him. They walked quickly toward the launch vehicle where I was standing. Zhou Zhan brought the members of both groups along with him. The new recruits watched from a distance, kept back by the Vice Commander's presence. Wan Kai stood there dazed, his face frozen and his eyes completely hollow. It was like a ghost had snatched his soul, and he collapsed onto the ground like a pile of mud. I don't believe it, he muttered. Not even American rocket artillery has this range. This is ridiculous. How could they have reached this level of engineering? The team ignored his breakdown and walked toward the 8,500-meter range rocket we had actually built. After exchanging looks with my comrades, I stepped out of the vehicle. Chen Zhe and I stood up straight and gave a sharp military salute. We held our breath as the high-ranking officials approached us. Vice Commander Xiao looked at us, his eyes gleaming with pride. He reached out and shook my hand with a firm, warm grip. Then he turned to Chen Zhe and gave him a heavy, affectionate pat on the back. "Young Chen, you've done something incredible today," he said. "This project is a massive victory for our military development." The rocket hit the target with absolute precision. The launch was a total success, beyond anything we expected. The brigade commander stepped forward, nodding in agreement. "Young Chen, you and your comrades have brought glory to our weapons factory." Chen Zhe looked down, feeling embarrassed by the praise from the two leaders. He whispered to them, "Sir, I was really just the messenger here. From the initial design to the final assembly, Brother Zhang did everything." The commanders, who had just started to calm down, froze in shock once again. A rocket this advanced, created by a single person? That kind of talent is 1 in 10,000. Master Li interrupted. "The precision and power are insane. I don't know how you did it, kid. I didn't let it go to my head. I just scratched my neck, keeping it humble." I looked at the data and told them, "This rocket still has some flaws. I calculated that relying solely on the gyroscope's inertial guidance would be risky. In terms of long-range precision, there could be an error of about 30 kilometers. Master Li's mouth twitched, completely speechless at my standards. The effective destruction range of a single volley already covers several kilometers. He probably thought I was being way too demanding with the details. But in my eyes, perfection is the only thing that matters in weapon design. The way the officials were looking at me started to shift. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a heavy sense of awe. They realized they weren't just looking at a soldier, but a genius. I could feel their growing respect as I stood my ground. I took a brief pause to let the information sink in before continuing. "I've also finished building a secondary rocket module," I added calmly. "This one has a confirmed strike range of 500 kilometers. I pointed toward the side of the mobile launch vehicle. I gave the missile compartment a casual pat and said it was ready for live-fire testing. But that wasn't even the most impressive part of the design. In theory, this launcher can carry more than just high-explosive conventional warheads. It can be equipped with specialized payloads designed for extreme armor penetration. It's lethal against mountains, permafrost, and even deep underground tunnels. Due to time and material constraints, the high-explosive payloads haven't been manufactured yet. So, strictly speaking, this record-breaking rocket launcher, the Type 10 long-range recon, the one you are all looking at right now, is just a semi-finished product." I let out a soft sigh, thinking back on this past month. I had rushed like a madman just to get to this point, to actually finalize those specialized warheads. Even with sufficient materials, it would still take some time. At least another 3 days of work. The officials' expressions turned blank as they processed my words. Specialized warheads? They had never heard of such a thing, but it sounded terrifying. Deputy Commander Xiao spoke up solemnly. "Comrade Chun, theory takes time to become reality. You call this semi-finished, but in my opinion, this R&D is already perfect and shocking." He was about to continue when he suddenly paused, his deep eyes locking onto mine. He realized that the first part of what I had said a moment ago was the real bombshell. "Xiao Chun, did you just say the main body is already built? That this 500-kilometer range launcher is ready for live-fire testing at any time?" "Yes," I replied. "It just needs a simple calibration." Deputy Commander Xiao. He gasped violently, his eyes nearly bulging out of his head. The air rushed down his throat and into his lungs. His chest felt like it was about to explode from the pressure. His heart hammered wildly, racing at a frantic pace. My words had caught him completely off guard. He had been so distracted that he ignored the most critical point. Before the test, I had already mentioned the 500-kilometer range, but they all thought it was just a theoretical fantasy. In their minds, reaching 150 kilometers was the standard limit. Hitting 300 kilometers would have been considered a miracle. But 500 kilometers? That was supposed to be impossible. Yet now, that impossibility was staring them right in the face. The officials around me began to tremble as they looked at the vehicle. They stared at the launch bay, realizing my 500-kilometer claim was real. And I was already planning even more powerful specialized warheads. I was ready to mount them and change the game forever. Suddenly, Zhou appeared silently by my side. He leaned in and whispered a piece of intelligence. He heard the Russian bear was developing a high-power Scud missile, a weapon with a 300-kilometer range, set to enter service soon. If that's the case, my rocket is already more powerful than the Russian bear's new missile. Everyone present started thinking about those rumors. Many nations were already well aware of the Scud missile project. The Russian bear was promoting it heavily, aiming for a massive export market. They planned to sell it at a premium once development finished. In fact, Vice Commander Xiao knew the details better than anyone because China was already in talks with them. We were prepared to pay a fortune for that Scud technology once it was ready. But looking at my launcher now, that purchase seemed completely unnecessary. My system was already more lethal than their missile, so why would we still want the Scud? Even if the Eagle's Patriot missile entered the equation, it wouldn't be enough to stop me. Vice Commander Xiao struggled to suppress the surge of excitement in his chest. He looked at me with a sudden, gentle warmth, shifting from a hardened general to a kind elder. Young Chun, that 500-kilometer projectile, we might have to wait a bit before we can test it. The truth is, we don't currently have a testing range large enough for that distance. He paused, his eyes gleaming with a different kind of hunger. But about that specialized warhead, the one you mentioned just a moment ago. If I provide you with all the materials you need, how long would it take? How long until you can successfully develop it? Countless eyes locked onto me as I rubbed my chin, thinking it over before pointing toward the workshop. I looked at Vice Commander Xiao and held up 3 fingers with a serious expression. Even if I have all the materials, it will take at least this long. Xiao stared at me, his mind racing as he tried to guess my timeline. He licked his dry lips and made a bold assumption. 3 months. The other leaders nearby suddenly tensed up at the sound of those words. If it really only took 3 months, that would be a miracle. Even for a military powerhouse like the Russian Bear, development takes forever. Creating a piece of high-end military hardware usually takes years of labor. Years are the standard unit of measurement for projects like this. Developing a rocket launcher in a single month was already mind-blowing. But the difficulty of a specialized warhead was on a completely different level. Finishing it in 3 months would be nothing short of a legend. The air in the room grew heavy and inexplicably hot with anticipation. Every eye was locked on me, waiting for my confirmation. They desperately wanted to know if I could really deliver that mysterious warhead. I listened to Vice Commander Zhao's guess and paused for a moment. Then I waved my hand dismissively and gave him a look of pure disbelief. 3 months? Why would I ever need that much time? I was talking about 3 days. Xiao nearly choked, telling me not to push myself too hard for the sake of the revolution. Good health is the only way to truly serve the people. The other leaders nearby overheard our conversation. Their eyes widened in pure, unadulterated disbelief. I could practically hear their brains buzzing from the shock. Their throats tightened as they struggled to swallow. A collective, sharp intake of breath hissed through the room. Developing it in 3 weeks would be insane, but Xiao was already spiraling. I quickly interrupted him with a calm, unexpected smile. No, Vice Commander Xiao, I said 3 days. I don't want any misunderstandings. It was like a massive lightning bolt slammed directly into Zhao's skull. The shock was so violent it felt like his mind was shattering. He looked completely lost, staring at me as if his soul had left his body. Did I really just say 3 days? How could that even be possible? The air in the room suddenly went still, and time seemed to freeze. Everyone present lost the ability to process what they were hearing. It felt like their very hearts had stopped beating in their chests. Developing a specialized warhead in 3 days was beyond absurd. If Einstein himself heard this, he wouldn't even know who he was anymore. Vice Commander Xiao stood there for 30 seconds, unable to utter a single word. Beside him, Lu Su took a deep breath, his face flushed with wild excitement. Are you actually serious? I asked, knowing anything is possible if we push hard enough. 2.5 days is also a possibility, I added calmly. Zhang Yun, gave him a reassuring answer to settle his nerves. Lu Su looked like he was about to take flight from pure adrenaline and made a snap decision. From this moment on, the entire Findu armament factory will cooperate with your R&D. He promised me every material, every robot, and every man I could ever need. Every single demand I had would be met to the absolute limit of their power. At that moment, the atmosphere shifted as if the weight of the entire city was behind us. Vice Commander Xiao finally snapped out of his trance and spoke with iron determination. That level of support isn't enough. Every requirement Zhang Yun has must be satisfied immediately. If we can't meet them, we find a way to make it happen. Everyone stays united. He was putting his whole heart into ensuring this spiritual warhead became a reality. From now on, he declared, Zhang Yun's words are my words. After he said that, the way everyone looked at me changed instantly. There was no doubt about it. My status was shifting right before their eyes. I was no longer just an intern back from studying abroad. My authority was rising like a tidal wave. Wang stood at the edge of the crowd, his eyes burning with resentment and jealousy. But there was nothing he could do. The gap between us had become an unbridgeable canyon. He and Chu could only force a weak, pathetic smile to hide their frustration. They let out a helpless sigh, realizing their influence had vanished in an instant. Lu Su looked like the life had been sucked right out of him. Then, he seemed to realize something critical about the future. He declared that no one could question my guidance or my research anymore. No one would be allowed to interfere for any reason whatsoever. Violators would face the maximum penalty, and then he turned his gaze toward me. I was being promoted on the spot to senior power engineer. I was granted a private employee dormitory and special subsidies immediately. He looked at me and asked, Zhang Yun, do you have any other needs? He told me to take advantage of the moment while he and the vice commander were there. The second he said those words, the room went silent. Everyone in groups 1 and 2 was absolutely dying of envy. They knew the factory director had a massive network of contacts across the globe. In the world of military R&D, there was rarely a problem he couldn't grasp. No one had ever received such a high honor from him before, and Vice Commander Xiao was even closer to being a god in this field. In the Longsway War, they said his word was the law of the battlefield. His influence was so vast it could rival a major international university project, as long as I didn't ask for something illegal, or something that went against basic morality. Vice Commander Xiao and Director Lu Su would approve it on the spot. This kind of opportunity only comes once in a lifetime. I felt the weight of everyone's gaze pressing down on me. My brow furrowed as I considered the offer. I tried to think of something useful, but honestly, being put on the spot like this was a real struggle. I didn't actually have any pressing needs or grand desires. As I stood there thinking, I happened to glance over at Yang Yochu. I remembered her mentioning something back at the launch vehicle. She was starving, and I realized I hadn't eaten a single thing for breakfast either. I looked up and asked, "Is there any breakfast still left at the cafeteria?" Lu Su froze, his eyelids twitching as if a sledgehammer had just crushed his foot. I could see the confusion in his eyes. Did I hear that right? I give you a blank check for anything in the world, and you ask for breakfast? Maybe this is just how a genius brain works. Totally incomprehensible. Since I'd already made the request, Lu Su couldn't exactly say no. He scanned the crowd and locked eyes with Wan Nikai. He ordered him to go to the break room and call the factory kitchen immediately. He told them to prepare steamed buns, tofu soup, and everything else. Wan Nikai's face turned bright red, making him look like a total clown. He couldn't disobey the director, so he slunk away to make the call. A man like him is a rare find, even if you searched with a lantern. His skills are exceptional, and his character is flawless, a truly rare combination. Now, we just have to see if the special warhead can really be finished in 3 days. Bandit activity in Saisai LNG has been rampant lately. Maybe that could serve as the perfect testing ground for the new warhead. Vice Commander Xiao felt a surge of intense anticipation deep in his heart. The moment Yang Yuchu heard me mention breakfast, she remembered what she'd said earlier. Her eyes shimmered with emotion as she looked at me, clearly moved. She didn't expect a genius like me to care about more than just complex formulas. I actually remembered the small, insignificant things she mentioned. I suppose this is what it feels like to be truly cared for by a man. Once things settled, Lu Su addressed the 3 research groups. He announced that the testing was over and praised everyone's hard work. He acknowledged that everyone had been up since dawn and hadn't eaten yet. He told the entire team to head to the cafeteria for breakfast immediately. Then he turned to me and asked if he and the vice commander could visit Factory 17 tomorrow. He wanted to discuss further details and asked if I'd be free to meet. The crowds began to disperse, with the first 2 groups heading for the transport trucks. I prepared to take Yang Yuchu back in the Type 19 rocket launcher vehicle. But just as we were about to board, Wan Nikai came trotting up, stopping a few paces away. He kept his distance, looking like he had something to say while Yang Yuchu and I watched him. Finally, Wan Nikai shouted, "Yuchu, come over here." Yang Yuchu's voice was ice cold as she replied, "If you have something to say it right there." Wan Nikai glanced at me before turning back to her with a twisted, desperate expression. "It's important," he insisted. "Just come here for a second." Yang Yuchu looked at me, and after I gave her a small nod, she reluctantly took a few steps toward him. A fake, flattering smile instantly broke across Wan Nikai's face. "Yuchu," he said softly, "my father brought me some imported canned beef from abroad. Why don't we go eat it together? We can share it when we have breakfast later, okay?" Yang Yuchu didn't even hesitate. She just frowned and looked him dead in the eye. "Eat it yourself, Wan Nikai, and don't come looking for me ever again. I don't want Brother Chun to get the wrong idea," she added, turning her back on him. She walked straight back to me without a second glance. It was like a bolt of lightning struck Wan Nikai right in the chest. His heart shattered and his face went completely dark, the light leaving his eyes. "He's just a hillbilly with no background," he muttered to himself, his voice trembling. "What's so special about building a rocket launcher? It's all stolen garbage anyway. How am I, Wan Nikai, inferior to a guy like that?" A wild, bitter roar erupted from him, echoing into the morning air. Engines, long-range rockets, and even aircraft. Suddenly, the launch vehicle roared to life. It kicked up a massive, fierce cloud of dirt. The unstoppable momentum sent a wave of yellow dust surging forward. It swept right toward the range exit where Wan Nikai stood. He got a mouthful of grit and stomped the ground in a fury. He glared at the waiting truck, his eyes full of resentment. Vice Commander Xiao and the factory staff finally drove away. The new recruits at the range were left standing in stunned silence. Every single one of them had a look of pure shock on their faces. "You all saw that, didn't you? That new launcher is terrifying. I heard the range is over 1,000 miles. Can you believe it? My God, it's unbelievable. At this rate, if we fire north from here, we'll hit them dead center." "You mean the Russian bear?" "Shoo, watch it, comrade. They're our big brothers. I'm just making a point." The recruits were locked in a heated debate. That's when an imposing figure stepped out from the crowd. His expression was cold and unyielding, radiating a sharp pressure. The entire field went dead silent the moment he appeared. "What you saw just now is classified as the greatest equipment in our history. It is a top-level state secret. From this moment on, no further discussion is permitted. You've all studied the confidentiality regulations, haven't you?" Everyone looked at him and snapped to attention instantly. They responded in a single, thunderous roar. "Yes, Captain." The leader of the new recruits took a deep breath. He looked down at the deep ruts left in the dirt, the heavy tracks left by the rocket launch vehicle. The ground was crushed flat beneath the weight of that power. His eyes burned with a sudden, intense fervor. I had watched from a distance as my creation finally came to life. A truly historic presentation. A man in his early 20s had developed a piece of hardware this lethal. China's future is rising, and no one can stop us now. The jackals who once trampled this land should be afraid. Everything they did to us will be returned 10,000 times over. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth at the Army Group headquarters. At Jean Zhou's field headquarters, Vice Commander Zhao's car screeched to a sudden halt. He jumped out and rushed straight into the command center. "Old Xiao, you're just in time," a voice called out. A thin, middle-aged man stood there. He was barely 5'7", standing before a massive sand table map. He gave Vice Commander Xiao a sharp nod. He looked ordinary enough, but his eyes held a hidden, lethal edge. Even a man of Zhao's rank couldn't help but feel a deep sense of respect for him. The Eiffel bandits are on the move again, and they're causing chaos in the mountains. Those beasts in human skin have finally crawled out of their holes. The Vice Commander processed the intel, his brow furrowing into a deep scowl. He clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white, his eyes turning ice-cold as he looked at old Luo. The Eiffel Benzai cannot be allowed to live. We have to find a way to wipe them off the map. As long as they exist, the Jingzhou region will never know peace. Commander Luo lit a cigarette, his movements slow and deliberate. He took a deep drag and exhaled slowly, his eyes sharpening with every second. He stared intensely at the mountain passes marked on the map. Leaning over the sand table, he spoke in a low, gravelly voice. "I've dug into the history of these bandits. They used to be the Team Military Corps. There are roughly 7,000 or 8,000 of them left. After they betrayed our country, they followed the invaders into war. They committed every atrocity imaginable alongside the Japanese. But then, the Japanese were defeated. Terrified of being executed for their crimes, they refused to surrender and fled into the Shaolin Mountains. That's where they formed the Eiffel Benzai." Vice Commander Zhao's eyes burned with a righteous fury. A cold, lethal light flashed across his gaze. "I will wipe out these traitors and lapdogs," Commander Luo growled, nodding. "The order is clear. Eliminate the Eiffel Benzai from the Shaolin Mountains immediately. They've spent 4 years digging tunnels. At the first sign of trouble, they vanish. The terrain is as deadly as Bayou Mountain, and our scouts can barely get close. 2 days ago, they were nearly discovered and barely escaped with their lives. To bury them, we need heavy firepower like the polar bear hammer to collapse their tunnels. Then, I'll let the bulk of the troops launch a full-scale attack. But borrowing the polar bear hammer from Maashin is the problem. It will take at least 2 months to get it here." As I said that, my eyes darkened with frustration. 2 months is a lifetime. This gang of bandits has waged war against the locals for years. They've committed every evil imaginable. Who knows where they'll strike next? They'll prey on innocent people already devastated by the pandemic. The weight of the war hung heavy, and the command room fell into a dead silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the heater in the corner. A hot drink sat on the side table, steam rising in thin curls. I stood there, repeating Commander Luo's words under my breath. "Destroy the underground structure, collapse the tunnels. I've got it." I suddenly slapped my thigh, a look of shock and realization hitting me. "Old Luo, we might not actually need the polar bear hammer to bury the Eiffel Benzai." Commander Luo's eyes lit up as he whipped his head toward me. "Old Xiao, don't tell me you've actually come up with a better idea. Are you thinking of calling in a bomber squadron from Maashin?" I curled my lips into a confident smirk and shook my head. "No bombers, but I can get us something even better. How does this sound? We'll launch a general assault on Eiffel Benzai and his territory in 5 days. We're going to uproot that gang of traitors who sell out the nation for their own glory." Commander Luo looked at me, completely perplexed, his brow furrowing deep. "Old Xiao, what you're saying sounds a bit strange. Do you really only need 5 days? I laughed. "Old Luo, want to make a bet?" "Fine. I want to see exactly what kind of trick you've got up your sleeve, Old Xiao." I let a confident smirk curl onto my face, leaving him in total awe. 3 days later, the development of the special warhead was finally complete. I just needed 2 more days to mass-produce a small batch of them. 5 days from now would be the perfect moment to crush Eiffel Benzai. I headed back to Findu Armament Factory number 18. I quickly drafted the list of necessary materials while grabbing a bite to eat. I handed the list over to Yang Yuchu. She took charge of coordinating the supply and shipment with the factory president. Before noon, several rare materials arrived, and the manufacturing of the special warheads began. By that morning, I had already earned 800 R&D points. I knew that once these warheads were finished, a whole new world of progress would open up. On the 4th day, a group of people approached the entrance of factory number 17. Deputy Director Xiao led the way with firm steps, followed by Director Lucy and Master Li. They had just returned from abroad, and Factory Director Lucy was about to push the door open. But Deputy Director Xiao stopped him and told him to knock first. Lucy stood there for a moment, completely stunned. He was looking at the respectable Deputy Director, the man in charge of the Jinx Field Army, and the primary authority over the Findu Armament Factory. Did he really need to knock to enter his own factory? But then he thought about it. He thought about the scientific genius inside and the research results I had presented yesterday. He followed Deputy Director Zhao's instructions immediately. He reached out and tapped gently on the heavy entrance. The iron door echoed with a soft thud, thud, thud. With a low creak, the door slowly swung open, and a clever little head peeked out from the gap. Her beautiful face was smudged with soot, her long lashes fluttering over wide eyes as she saw the group. Ah, Deputy Director Xiao, Director Lucy, Master Li, Yang Yuchu exclaimed, straightening up quickly. Xiao asked with a calm expression, is he inside? And she nodded, yes, please come in. Yang Yuchu stepped aside, and the group filed into the factory one by one. A blast of hot air hit their faces instantly, making their pores open and their skin tingle. It was freezing outside, at least 6 degrees below zero, but inside it was over 20 degrees. Yang Yuchu had organized the entire space, lining up the various machine tools in perfect order. Even the discarded machines had been adjusted and organized. Walking in, the place finally looked like a real factory. Follow me, everyone. Brother Chun is inside. She led the group through the central corridor, heading deep into the facility. They had only taken a few steps when Lucy suddenly froze. He stopped dead and turned his head toward a milling machine. Everyone else stopped too, following Lucy's stunned gaze. What's wrong, Director? Someone asked, but the joking stopped there. Lucy stepped closer to the clamping front of the machine. He reached out and tried to turn the cutting spindle slightly. His entire body went stiff. A look of pure shock and disbelief washed over his face. This 6S82G clamping miller, wasn't it destroyed when the Guangzhou troops left? Since we took over the factory, we've invited so many master repairmen. None of them could fix it, so how is it working now? This 6S82G model is one of the most powerful machines of its brand. Tool precision is vital for high-end technology. The machining quality on this thing is incredibly high. It was even better than the millers currently used in the main factory. If it had truly been repaired, it should run perfectly the moment it's plugged in. Yang Yuchun overheard Lucy's muttering. She turned her head and gave a casual explanation. Brother Chin fixed that machine 2 weeks ago. I tested it myself, and it works fine. The precision and the turning capacity are actually incredible. They're even better than they were before the damage. Lucy's heart skipped a beat as he stared at Yang Yuchun in total shock. Theoretically, only the original manufacturer could solve a problem this complex. No matter how skilled a master repairman is, some things just can't be restored. The precision and performance are supposed to take a permanent hit. But then I remembered, Xiao Chun developed a high-performance Type 19 rocket launcher. If he can modify an F&K universal lathe, fixing another machine tool isn't impossible for him. The director took a moment to process this. Then, he asked the question that was bothering him. In that case, why aren't you using this machine? It would be perfect for manufacturing and turning the components. Why go back to using bows and arrows? As soon as he asked, the tension in the room spiked. Everyone turned their gaze toward Yang Yuchun, waiting for an answer. She replied calmly. Brother Chin said the workbench on this miller wasn't good enough. The machining layout isn't ergonomic. It's not convenient, and it's inferior to the F&K universal lathe. Using it would just waste time. Because it needs a deep modification, I just left it here to collect dust for now. Lucy's mouth twitched as a cold shiver ran down his spine. Control millers of this caliber are the most sought-after machines in the industry right now. There aren't more than 20 of them in the entire country. Each one is the crown jewel of a major factory. Factory directors would probably sleep in the workshop just to guard them. Some struggling factories are desperate for equipment. They trade anything for a control miller like this, yet here it is, just gathering dust. Master Li, standing off to the side, listened with growing frustration. His face twisted in disbelief at what he was hearing. Not ergonomic, a waste of time. Was I hearing this right? Yang Yuchun didn't stop there. She raised her arm and pointed to several other spots around the warehouse. Director Wan, look over there. That's a 16K20 lathe from the Soviet Union, but Brother Chin says it's too clunky and dumb to use. So after I fixed it, I just abandoned it. And that one, the British Universal lathe. I fixed that too, but I hated the green casing on top. It looks cheap. So I tossed it in the corner with the electron beam control miller. Then there's the 640-volt unit from Japan. After I finished repairing it, I took one look at the casing and shook my head. The pink finish was too much. No real man would ever use that. So I tossed it aside too. But that wasn't all. She took us on a full tour of the graveyard. Rows of lathes that were originally scrapped during the war sat before us. I had repaired almost every single one, only to abandon them, 15 machines in total. Director Wan stared at Yang Yuchun in absolute shock. A cold chill gripped his throat as he realized the lathe is the mother of all industry. If I had truly fixed this many scrap machines, the potential was limitless. The Fendu armament factory could produce massive amounts of military gear for the nation. It was a feat easily comparable to the development of the Type 19 rocket launcher. But could this actually be real? Director Wan's brow furrowed in doubt. He rubbed his chin and eventually shook his head. No matter how he looked at it, the story just didn't add up. Fixing 1 or 2 was possible, but this many? That wasn't the work of a human being. He wondered if Yang Yuchun was just being mischievous and playing a prank on them. The crowd around us trembled, their faces painted with pure disbelief. Zhou Zhen and the other returning students stood there frozen. They began to mutter to themselves, unable to process something so incredible. Could someone really do such a thing? I didn't think it was possible. All these machines came from so many different countries. How could I fix every single one of them from scratch? Yang Yuchun saw the doubt in their eyes and quickly spoke up. She told them I didn't just repair them, I improved them. I had upgraded the control systems to boost their precision and power. They were now more efficient than the day they left the original factory. Hearing that, the crowd grew even more tense. Their faces were twisted in shock, unable to mask their skepticism. Even if we gathered every engineer who built these machines, they couldn't do this. One man shouted that if this were true, he'd eat a bowl of hot coals. He caught himself, but insisted it was simply impossible. He asked Yang Yuchun if she was playing a joke on everyone. He reminded her that Vice Commander Xiao and the factory master were present. We were all rational, normal people. How could we believe such nonsense? Then, the factory master's eyes flashed with an idea. He smiled at Yang Yuchun and said, if these are real, starting a fuse shouldn't be a problem. Yang Yuchun nodded shyly and gestured toward the lathes surrounding us. She explained that I had already updated the power supply while I was recovering. I had completely transformed the factory's internal circuit system. There were power outlets installed right next to every lathe. I had placed them there to make testing easier, and the factory master noticed. His eyes shifted, surprised that Yang Yuchun had agreed to a test. She had given in far too easily for this to be a bluff. Could I really have fixed them already? Lucy urged Master Li to step forward. The factory master nodded to him, and Li walked toward the machines. He approached a rugged-looking 16K20 lathe and leaned in. He spotted the special black three-phase power socket I had installed. He plugged the heavy machine into the new power supply. Then he stepped to the front, his gaze locking onto the circular start button. It was a bright green. He took a deep breath and twitched his fingers. For some reason, his nerves were completely shot. His body was tense, and his lips felt bone dry. A thick atmosphere of tension filled the entire factory floor. Around him, the crowd started shouting with urgent voices. Old Li, don't just stand there. Start the machine. Master Li, what are you waiting for? Master Li, press the button already. They yelled, and he felt a surge of pressure. At that moment, a strange sensation washed over Master Li's heart. He forced himself to calm down, and, without hesitating, he raised his hand. He pointed his index finger toward the green start button. The machine sat there, cold and silent. He didn't hesitate any longer. With a quick shove, click, the crisp sound of the button echoed. The noise rang in everyone's ears like a gunshot. Countless people held their breath at the exact same time. Every gaze was locked onto this 16K20 lathe. This Russian beast was supposed to roar to life. 1 second, 2 seconds, 10 full seconds passed, and the lathe didn't show a single sign of life. Master Li grimaced and gave me a bitter, pitying smile. I saw a hint of deep disappointment flash in Zhang Jun's eyes. Vice Commander Xiao remained silent the entire time, but I could see the light in his eyes fading away. He wanted my words to be true, but reality was hitting him hard. I had already built the Type 19 rockets. They felt I couldn't be a miracle worker twice. Zhou Zhen and the other returning students shook their heads in defeat. They all looked at me like I was a child who had finally been caught in a lie. I ignored the stares and walked toward the main circuit breaker nearby. I let out a small, sheepish laugh that broke the heavy silence. Sorry, I almost forgot. I didn't flip the main switch, I said, and I slammed it up. I stood there in the dark and just listened for a subtle current. The electricity surged through the switch and into the machine. A sudden, sharp sensation of power filled the air. A low hum instantly vibrated through the entire factory floor. The 16K20 lathe suddenly shuddered and began to buzz with life. A powerful roar erupted like a beast waking from a long slumber. Every shaft began to spin frantically as the indicator lights flickered on. The machine was running perfectly, making the floor beneath us tremble. A faint cloud of dust kicked up into the air from the sudden movement. Master Li and the other senior masters swallowed hard, their faces twitching. They couldn't believe it. The machine was actually repaired. Factory head Wang stared at the lathe, his jaw trembling in shock. His eyes were wide, filled with a storm of conflicting emotions. He looked like he wanted to dunk his head in water just to wake up. He needed to know for sure if this was just a hallucination. Zhou Zhen and the other returning students stood frozen with their mouths agape. They remained rooted to the spot, completely unable to find their words. Master Li finally regained his composure and looked at the stunned factory head. Factory head, we should proceed with the machine tool test, he suggested. Wang snapped out of his daze and gave the order to begin the trial. The test sequence repeated over and over. The first measurement tracked the stop position to calculate the maximum variance. That's how we determined the machine's true precision. As I spoke, the first round of testing came to an end. Master Li, usually as steady as a rock, suddenly felt his arm tremble. A look of profound shock washed over his face as his breathing quickened. This is impossible, he whispered under his breath. Master Li gripped the measuring block with white-knuckled intensity. Without offering a word of explanation, he ran the sequence again. He started several more tests in rapid succession until they were finished. His entire expression shifted as he stared at the data on the screen. His world was being shattered by the numbers right in front of him. His chest heaved like a bellows, his heart hammering against his ribs. He spun around toward the crowd and made a frantic announcement. The precision test results are in, he shouted with wild eyes. This machine has reached 5 times its original rated accuracy. I have been an artillery engineer for more years than I can count. I have seen every model of lathe under the sun, but I have never seen a machine operate at this level of perfection. Master Li gasped for air, his pupils contracting as he grabbed his chest. He grabbed Master Li by the shoulders with both hands. Old Li, you must have messed up the measurement. This doesn't exist. A lathe with that level of precision is impossible, even if you made a mistake. But you can't make the same mistake 7 times in a row. Master Li's hand trembled as he held the metal block, his emotions spiraling. I have worked here for decades, and I have never once made a mistake. Why don't you try it on another machine then? Master Li didn't hesitate and walked over to a German bowed universal lathe. The machine's deep green casing stood out sharply in the workshop. Without saying a single word, Master Li moved with purpose. He plugged in the power source and slammed his hand onto the start button. The machine roared to life, and the expressions of everyone in the room shifted. It was now clear that what Commander Zhao said was the absolute truth. The machines that were supposed to be scrap metal had actually been repaired. The fact that 2 machines picked at random were both functioning perfectly was more than enough to prove that my process worked. But the real question remained. Would the precision on this machine be just as high? Had I really improved it that much? The grueling test lasted for 5 intense minutes. The test results were finally in. Dozens of workers crowded around, their eyes locked onto Master Li. Everyone held their breath, waiting for him to announce the verdict. Master Li's neck looked stiff and strained. He turned his head slowly, like a rusted bearing grinding into place. The director pulled him aside to get a better look. Master Li's face was completely distorted with shock. He was trembling, his silence stretching on far too long. Finally, he spoke. You won't believe me when I say this, but the precision, it has reached a terrifying level 8. He looked at the surface roughness of the metal block. It was only 1.6 microns, even more precise than the original specs. I had improved this machine's performance 8 times over since it left the factory. It was now more powerful than a modern 16K20 lathe. His words hit the room like a sudden crack of thunder. The revelation sent a shockwave through the crowd. Panic and disbelief set in as their minds began to buzz. Except for Commander Gao, every single person standing there was an expert. They all understood exactly what those numbers meant. A machine with this level of precision changed everything. It meant we could now process more precise and advanced military equipment. This was the cornerstone for developing our military science and technology. Even the Soviet Bear, despite their ties to Waxia, refused to sell us their top-tier lathes. The reason for their secrecy was obvious. Standing at the back of the crowd, I felt my own heart racing as I watched the research department. I knew the precision and performance would improve, but I didn't expect it to be this insane. Even I was caught off guard by the sheer scale of what I had achieved. The test results were undeniable. After a brief moment of stunned silence, Director Lu's face transformed into a mask of pure ecstasy. He was becoming more and more agitated as the realization set in. I could feel the blood in my own veins starting to boil with heat. The enthusiasm and excitement radiating from the crowd was palpable. It felt like a volcanic eruption was about to burst in the room. Thank you, I thought, watching their reactions. Everything was going exactly as planned. The director's expression shifted completely, and the corners of his lips curled into a wide, joyful smile. Even if some didn't fully grasp the technical side, they knew this was the new foundation for our military research and development. I focused on the fragments of conversation between Director Lu and the master. It was clear these lathes would be a massive boost for the armament factory. They would change the game for the entire research and development department. Waxia's military future was looking brighter than ever. I listened closely to see if they truly understood the magnitude of this. I had proven myself as an exceptional talent. I looked over at Zhaozhen and the other returning overseas students. They stood there, frozen in place. Their faces were a pathetic mix of shock and pure envy. Some of them looked like they were still dreaming. The situation defied logic, but the cold, hard facts were right in front of them. Their eyes were glued to the lathes, unable to look away for even a second. The workers were staring with a deathly intensity. One guy looked like he'd trade his own wife for a machine this precise. I wondered if they'd start offering to shine my shoes just to get a closer look. Director Lu reached out, his hand trembling as he touched a universal lathe. He caressed the metal with more tenderness than he'd show his own father. He looked like a man falling in love for the first time. He finally pulled his hand back, though he clearly didn't want to. Word was already spreading past the factory gates and down the national highway. The collective attention felt like a massive, red-hot furnace. Director Lu and the others looked back and saw a familiar figure standing right there. I was surrounded by dozens of massive gas tanks. I was making constant minor adjustments when I heard the noise behind me and turned my head. I gave them a slightly apologetic look and acknowledged Vice Commander Xiao and Commander Zhao. I nodded to Master Li and the other comrades and said, I'm sorry. I'm at a critical stage right now and I can't stop. Please wait. Just a moment, please. I'll finish this soon. Director Lu and Commander Zhao poked their heads forward to examine the scene carefully. They stared at the dense cluster of tanks in front of me with terrified, wide-eyed expressions. The tanks were stamped with red danger symbols for explosions, clearly labeling the contents. Methane, ethylene, propane, acetylene, all high-energy fuels. Not far off was carbon oxide. I was playing with fire, but I knew exactly what I was doing. If any of this leaked, it wouldn't just be the workshop that was in trouble. Half the entire factory area would be blown sky high. Master Li realized the danger of the situation immediately. His face went pale as his survival instincts kicked in. His legs started twitching, wanting to carry him as far away as possible. He looked like he wanted to bolt out of the room right then and there. I guess staying alive was more important to him than the research. Because if you're dead, nothing else matters. There's nothing left. Even Vice Commander Xiao, who was used to seeing massive battlefields, swallowed hard. He looked at me with an expression that was hard to read. It was getting more interesting by the second. I wasn't just a genius in their eyes anymore. I was a complete and utter madman. But that's exactly how geniuses achieve the impossible. They don't believe in limits. Only those with the focus of a lunatic can develop top-tier military gear. Zhou Zhan and the other Riternese students were shaking so hard they couldn't move. If the vice commander and the director weren't there, they would have bolted. I finally finished the adjustments and opened the last valve with a satisfying click. I stretched my back as the group cautiously approached me. Master Li looked at me, his voice trembling with unease. "Little Chun, what on earth were you just doing?" I gestured toward the setup I had painstakingly prepared. I pointed to the massive, 3-meter-tall steel cylinders behind me. I looked at them and explained as patiently as I could. Toluene, diethyl ether, and acetone. Acetylene, acetone, and other volatile organic compounds. When mixed and pressurized at a specific nominal ratio, you can create a first-generation thermobaric agent. It's a shame that our current situation limits us to just toluene, diethyl ether, acetone, and steel. If we could get our hands on nitric acid, aluminum powder, and magnesium, I could mix a thermobaric agent with an even stronger effect. Director Liu stood there, completely stupefied, his gaze turning blank. What is a thermobaric agent? What is a temperature-pressure agent? He heard every word clearly, but the combination of terms meant nothing to him. I was explaining it so seriously that I didn't even notice his confusion. The factory director, despite his technical background, couldn't follow a word. His old face couldn't take the embarrassment anymore. He couldn't even look me in the eye. He had a sudden idea and turned his head toward Master Li. "Old Li, you're the veteran technician of our factory. You understood what Chen said, right?" Master Li's eyes darted around, his rough hands scratching the air inside his sleeves. His wandering gaze landed on Zhou Zhan, who was standing off to the side. His eyes lit up as he shifted the pressure. "Little Zhou, do you understand? Don't pretend to understand if you don't. In our line of work, being practical is key." Zhou Zhan froze as he noticed the heavy gaze of everyone in the room. The gazes converged on him, and his cheeks began to twitch. He looked at Director Liu and me with a worried expression. I could see it in his eyes. The old leader clearly hadn't understood a thing. But he spoke with such eloquence while passing the buck to me. What a lack of virtue, especially since I'm the one who actually knows a bit. I understand a little about what's going on here. I quickly changed the subject to break the tension. I looked at what Zhou Zhan was holding in his hand. I gave him a friendly smile. "That's a ratchet screwdriver. I modified it from a standard one. It makes driving screws much more efficient. It's all about saving a bit of effort on the line." Director Liu and Commander Liu both got interested immediately. They each grabbed one from my workbench to inspect it. Zhou Zhan examined the ratchet and found some scrap metal with tight stress screws nearby. He tried to loosen them with the ratchet screwdriver at first, but after 2 turns, the screw wouldn't even budge. I gave him a quick reminder. "Press the button on top. That changes the direction." Zhou Zhan clicked it and tried again. Click, click, click. The screw finally broke loose. It loosened easily, without any effort at all. Zhou Zhan stared at the ratchet screwdriver in his hand, his breathing quickening. This thing is a masterpiece for mechanical work. It was so much better than a normal screwdriver that he began handling it with pure affection. I could tell he wished he could just take it home with him. Commander Liu couldn't resist trying it out either, and he looked absolutely marveled. He told me he didn't expect me to be making such practical little tools on the side. He said it's no wonder I could develop the Type 19 rocket launcher all by myself. I just gave a modest smile and told him they were just little gadgets not worth mentioning. Then, Zhou Zhan picked up another tool from the side. I stepped in to explain what he was looking at. I told him it was a ratchet wrench, also used for tightening bolts. Zhou Zhan frowned, looking at it with intense curiosity. He asked why this one didn't have a button to adjust the direction like the other one. Before I could even speak, Yang Yuchu chimed in with a smirk. She told him if he wanted to turn it the other way, he just had to flip the wrench over. Zhou Zhan froze, his face turning bright red as he looked for a place to hide. After all, he was a student who had just returned from studying in France. He had worked on R&D projects during his internship and considered himself elite. Asking such a basic question in front of me was a total embarrassment. Vice Minister Xiao looked at me with genuine interest. He asked me to introduce the rest of the equipment to them. He could tell these tools were vital for the factory's development. I nodded and began a series of presentations, starting with the mobile crane. I explained how I had modified it from an original module in the factory. They listened intently to every word I said. Then I pointed toward the hydraulic jacks. I had built a double-column system using 2 damaged jacks I found. I told them that was almost everything, but then I remembered one more. I stepped aside to reveal the final piece of equipment. The entire group stood there with completely blank expressions. Behind me was a 3-foot-tall iron casing connected to several thick cables and a gas cylinder. I introduced it as a carbon dioxide shielded welder. Commonly known as a CO2 welder, it was the real deal for heavy-duty work. Vice Minister Xiao and the others stared at my invention with frozen faces. Their eyes were glazed over, and their minds were clearly lagging behind. They simply couldn't keep up with the level of technology one was showing them. It felt like their brains were about to explode from the information overload. Every single tool I had built was going to be incredibly useful for the plant. There was absolutely no doubt about that. This was a game-changing artifact for the factory's production line. Master Li scratched his head, muttering that I was being far too modest calling these insignificant gadgets. The few hairs he had left on his head were practically standing on end. One of the officials looked at the welder and asked hesitantly, "A welding machine? Our factory already has one of those. We spent a fortune on it a few months ago. That machine connects steel structures together. It's fast, secure, and very useful, but how is this any different from standard welding?" That was the question on everyone's mind as they turned their eyes toward me. They waited intensely for my answer. I took a moment to recall the specific principles and mechanics of the machine. I explained that MIG welding uses carbon dioxide as a shielding gas to protect the electrode and the arc. It uses high temperatures to melt and fuse the metal perfectly. Standard electric welding just uses current to melt the metal, but MIG welding is far more delicate. The finish is much cleaner and more orderly than anything a standard welder can do. It offers significantly better results. The corrosion resistance is superior. "I see now," Vice Minister Xiao whispered. "No wonder the Type 69 rocket launcher has such tight, solid, and aesthetic welds. It looks as if every joint was hand-sculpted by a master artist." I realized then that they had found the quality of my work strange from the very beginning. Standard electric welders simply can't produce results like this. It's only possible because we used these specific MIG welders. Beside me, Li Shui reacted instantly to my explanation. She looked at me with eyes full of excitement and undisguised affection. Every single one of my inventions was enough to cause a sensation in the industry. Today, a new door had been opened for all of them. Master Li and the other engineers nodded in agreement. This small machine had completely reshaped their understanding of R&D. Vice Commander Xiao stepped forward, looking like the true leader he was. He asked if I'd hit any snags with the special warhead development and promised his full support. I scratched my head sheepishly and told him the factory had already been a huge help. Vice Commander Xiao looked satisfied, but then his expression turned serious. He told me there was one more thing he needed to discuss. It was about the rocket launcher, specifically the experimental urban model I had been developing. He wanted to know if we could start mass-producing it immediately. Equipping the army with it sooner would drastically increase our combat power. "That won't be a problem," I replied without a second of hesitation. The machine tools outside had already been repaired and were ready to go. We just needed to staff them with 5 or 6 skilled technicians. With a dozen master workers trained on the lathes, we can form the first unit. It would be a small-scale mass production team in a suitable location. Mass production can begin at any moment. As long as the raw materials arrive on time, the workers will become proficient quickly. I believe over 10 Type 19 guided rocket launchers can roll off the line every month. I watched the impact of my words hit Vice Commander Zhao's eyes. His pupils dilated, shimmering with a sudden, sharp light. His breathing grew heavy, and his entire posture stiffened with tension. Even Commander Luo's breathing hitched noticeably. He wasn't nearly as calm as he tried to appear on the surface. 10 units a month was a massive leap in firepower. If we kept that pace every single month, we could form a special corps of indestructible rocket launchers in no time. By then, the cleanup of the remaining enemy forces would be a done deal. We would be absolutely unstoppable. The soldiers and guerrillas joined the war for one reason: to protect the Chinese civilians. They have suffered enough, and this would finally reduce our casualties. I had given them an answer that far exceeded their expectations. Before Vice Commander Xiao could even respond, I saw his hands tremble. Before I could say another word, Commander Luo frowned slightly. He looked at me with a mix of confusion and concern. He told me that while personnel and materials weren't the issue, the technical knowledge was. Even if they took my launcher apart piece by piece, they might not be able to replicate it. I just smiled and reached for a thick stack of papers on the workbench. I handed the entire pile directly to Commander Luo. He stared at the messy stack of drafts in his hands, looking completely lost. Master Li, Vice Commander Xiao, and the others all craned their necks to see. Luo focused on the first line of the top page and began to read it aloud. Type 19 Remote Phase Control Rocket Launcher. Design drafts and detailed schematics. A sharp, collective gasp of cold air echoed through the entire factory. Luo's hands began to shake so violently his fingers nearly spasmed. He asked if these were really the complete design blueprints for the Type 19. I nodded calmly and told him they were, including every detailed diagram. I explained that I drew them to ensure there would be no mistakes during manufacturing. The technicians just needed to follow the drafts and diagrams step by step. I told them they could come to me anytime if they hit a snag. Commander Luo's jaw dropped as his gaze fixed on those papers with newfound intensity. His chin trembled, and he gripped the drafts so hard his knuckles turned white. To any scientist, these results are worth more than life itself, especially for tech this advanced. This was different from anything in the US or Russia. They don't possess a rocket launcher this powerful or data this vital. I was handing over a scientific breakthrough to the factory as a free donation to the country. Commander Luo looked at me and choked out, "Chun, I'm actually going to cry." He solemnly tucked the drafts against his chest as if protecting a child. A tidal wave of shock and raw emotion surged through his heart. He looked at Vice Commander Xiao with a gaze full of pure admiration. Master Wang and the students like Zhou Zhun looked at me with profound respect. They all understood the weight of what I had just done. I had given away a masterpiece that the rest of the world couldn't even dream of. I dedicated it all to the nation right there in front of them. Under their collective gaze, I felt my own presence grow taller. I stood upright, imposing and filled with a new sense of purpose. Luo looked into my clear, steady eyes and couldn't find the words to speak. He suddenly grabbed Vice Commander Zhao's arm and muttered, "Lao Xiao." The two of them hurried out of Factory 17 to get some air. As soon as they were outside, Luo's eyes narrowed with sudden intensity. He asked Xiao if he realized how important the designs in his arms were. Xiao nodded, calling them an invaluable treasure that I had surrendered without a word. Luo gripped the papers and said, "We need to show him something in return, don't we?" Vice Commander Xiao looked at Luo with a heavy, serious expression. Luo took a deep breath and said we had to give Xiao Chun the highest recognition possible, no matter what it took. We couldn't let the hearts of our scientific researchers grow cold. Vice Commander Xiao nodded, his voice echoing with the same resolve. "That is exactly how it should be," he said, pausing for a moment. He decided on a plan right then and there. He would use his influence within the military's combat divisions. "I will apply for national-level merits from the state," he declared. Luo agreed immediately, promising to secure every reward from the defense industry system. But then, a sudden thought crossed Luo's mind, and he hesitated. He worried that a guy like me might not even want to accept the accolades. The vice commander didn't skip a beat. He waved his hand decisively to cut off the doubt. "If he doesn't want it, we'll force him to take it," he insisted. "He might not care about the glory, but we can't afford to be ungrateful." The two of them finished their talk and walked back into the factory satisfied. They spent a few more minutes chatting with the rest of the team. Vice Commander Xiao didn't want to waste any more of my precious R&D time. He led the group out of the factory, leaving me to get back to work. I dove back into my research and development. Even though the material shortage made a true thermobaric explosive impossible for now, I figured a fuel air explosive would be a solid alternative in the meantime. Chun Zhe followed my lead, and after a month of training, he was like a different person. He went from being clumsy to incredibly agile and efficient in his operations. He got so good that I didn't even need to step in anymore. He could handle the complex tasks all on his own. Meanwhile, Yin Yuchu was busy pouring my custom mixture into the welded shell. She looked up and asked quietly, "Brother Chun, why is this shell design so different? Why do we need to use these specific internal structures?" She was pointing at the intermediate metal layer I had placed at the top. It sat right inside the internal cavity of the projectile. Won't this layer slow down the activation of the explosive? She wondered. She was worried about the exact moment the casing would detonate. Will it reduce the overall power of the blast? I didn't give her a direct answer right away. Instead, I looked at her and threw a question back to test her knowledge. "Yuchu, tell me, what are the main components of our current fuel air explosive?" "Methane, acetylene, propane, and diethyl ether," she recited perfectly. All the elements needed to trigger the combustion and explosion reaction. She was listing the core strengths of these high-energy fuels. "You need the perfect ratio of fuel to air," she continued, "and then you ignite it with an open flame." "I see, so that's why." Yin Yochu's slender frame suddenly trembled as the realization hit her. Her breathing quickened, her chest rising and falling with her excitement. A brilliant spark of understanding flashed in her wide, damp eyes. It was absolutely dazzling. "No wonder the warhead has this internal and external cavity structure," she exclaimed. "The high-energy explosive in the inner cavity detonates first, using the shockwave to disperse the fuel. It spreads the cloud explosive everywhere before the second detonation hits. My God, if we do it this way, the power would be..." She couldn't even finish the sentence. The implications were unimaginable. The more Yuchu thought about the potential, the more her gaze began to shake with fear. She turned her eyes toward me, her heart racing wildly against her ribs. Her chest heaved even more intensely as she stared at me in awe. This type of warhead design was practically like something out of a magic trick. She had studied advanced weaponry in Russia herself, but no tutor had ever shown her anything like this. I knew for a fact that even the US or Russia wouldn't be able to design a warhead this advanced. It was something entirely new. She was dying to know how my brain worked to come up with such a brilliant structure. Beep, beep, beep. The pressure sensor went off, snapping Yin Yuchu back to reality. She quickly reached out and closed the valve for the Cloudstorm agent. This specific sensor was the key to the whole operation. I had designed it to be incredibly precise. It was set to trigger automatically once the exact amount of fuel was injected. Inside the shell, the environment was pressurized for a high-altitude drop. Once the projectile reached 3,000 meters, the physics would change. The internal pressure and the sonic sensor would sync up perfectly. Yin Yuchu finished her part of the work and looked up, her voice sounding different. "Be careful with this one, brother," she whispered. She was looking at our special projectile with a mix of pride and terror. Does it have a name? She asked. I smiled and said, why don't you guess? I kept working, dismantling a nearby component as I waited for her answer. Yin Yuchu leaned in, her curiosity getting the better of her. She tapped her index finger against her chin, deep in thought. Her large eyes blinked rapidly as she processed the data. She considered the special warhead and the core explosive inside. If the main component is the Cloudstorm agent, she mused, then the name must be Cloudstorm, but cooler. I stopped what I was doing and looked at her. I smiled, glancing at the people around us. I reached out toward Yin Yuchu and pinched her cheek, which was as soft and elastic as a baby's. That's right, her face. Yin Yuchu's expression lit up with pure joy, but there was a hint of shyness there, too. She bit her lower lip, her heart racing. Why is Brother Chen being so bold? She wondered. So, our Cloudstorm bomb must be incredibly powerful, right? She asked. I grabbed a piece of paper from the workbench and started sketching. I drew casually, explaining that there are many things that shouldn't be done. I showed her 5 different projectile shapes. The first is a white phosphorus bomb, I said. Its lethality is immense. It's effective, even if it doesn't reach the level of a Cloudstorm bomb. But when it comes to the sheer terror and torture it inflicts on the enemy, it's just as devastating as any Cloudstorm weapon. Yin Yuchu froze for a moment, the doubt in her eyes deepening. Brother Chun, how do you know such insidious secrets? She asked. I stopped laughing. My face went stiff instantly. Of course, I couldn't tell her the truth. I couldn't say I learned this from history books and old newspapers back in my world. The horrors of war are easy to see if you know where to look. Yin Yuchu stared at me in total awe, so I quickly changed the subject. I pointed to the second sketch and told her it was an extreme beam bomb. She might have heard of them, but white phosphorus bombs are still rare. In terms of raw power, these beam bombs are actually a bit weaker. They can't match a thermobaric, but these next 3 are the real monsters. I tapped the third diagram, showing her designs this world has never seen. I explained that this was a microburst bomb, similar to a thermobaric structure. By swapping formaldehyde for nitric acid paper and an organic absorbent, it hits even harder, a true upgrade, though our materials are limited right now. I told her we'd have to wait on that one, then I waved my hand to move on. The thermobaric bomb was already finished and ready to go, but we needed to hurry and craft a different, specialized warhead. This one had to be built in total secrecy, perfectly airtight. It was going to take time, and if we didn't pick up the pace, we'd be stuck working through the night. Again, Yin Yuchu looked at me with a deep, unreadable expression. Then she turned her gaze back to the blueprints, clutched tightly in her hand. Her eyes lingered on the final 2 diagrams for a long moment. Those last sketches of the bomb casings sparked a deep curiosity in her. She was about to ask what they were when, suddenly, a realization struck her like a bolt of lightning. Her face twisted into an expression of pure horror. Her pupils contracted sharply as her entire body went cold. The hair on the back of her neck stood up instantly. Could that 4th design really be the start of something that terrifying? The legendary superbomb that levels cities and leaves the land barren for decades. The Russian bear only successfully tested theirs 2 months ago. Does Chin really know this too? Yin Yuchu looked at me with a gaze full of complex emotions. We both studied with the Russians, yet the gap between us is this massive? She shook the thought away. She knew following my lead was the only right choice. As for the 5th diagram, she didn't even bother trying to understand it. She trusted me implicitly, and that was enough to settle her mind. We focused on the next 2 tasks ahead of us. The days began to blur together in the heat of the forge. Development inside Workshop 17 moved at a breakneck pace. We finally entered the final phase of the project. Through our combined efforts, the specialized warhead was finally taking its lethal shape. I successfully installed it into the rocket's combat section. The other specialized initiative was also nearing completion. Our research and manufacturing speed was hitting an extreme peak. The progress was incredibly fast. By late afternoon, I combined the final warhead with the rocket booster. I looked at Yuchu, her face flushed from the work, and asked if we could call Vice Commander Xiao. Yin Yuchu nodded immediately. Yes, the Post and Telecommunications Office helped us recently. They installed a long-distance circuit directly to the Jingzhou Army headquarters. Good, let's report in before it gets dark, I said. Meanwhile, at the Jianzhou Field Army Command Post, Commander Luo and Vice Commander Xiao were hunched over a sand table. A voice suddenly rang out from the door as a communications soldier appeared. Don't rush, speak slowly, Xiao commanded as the soldier gasped for air. The soldier licked his cracked lips and spoke in a loud, strained voice. Reporting to Commander Luo, we received an urgent message from Tuyao village near the Siena Mountains. The bandits from Finalizing are threatening the locals again. They're moving on the village tonight, demanding 20 carts of grain and 30 women, all to be handed over within a single day. The bandits are returning to Tuyao village at midnight to collect the grain. They're coming for the women too, Vice Commander Xiao. A cold light flashed in Zhao's eyes as he spoke in a low, gravelly voice. That sounds like Ifanze style. The intel is likely true. The former general of Guangzhou found managing the Jinzhou area to be a massive challenge. After failing to crush Ifanze in a siege, the previous administration gave up. They chose to turn a blind eye, and the bandits realized the law was toothless. They became even more rampant, terrorizing the common folk without mercy. Most villages in the Ipo region are too terrified to disobey Ifanze's orders. They usually surrender everything the bandits demand just to survive. Commander Luo clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white with rage. The Ifan gang deserved to rot for what they've done. Their cruelty had gone on for far too long. Xiao pulled out his pocket watch and checked the time. Luo, our plan was to attack the day after tomorrow. But we're running out of time. It's 7 p.m. and they're still in their hideout. We have 5 hours before their midnight deadline. Let's move now. Commander Luo's eyes shifted slightly as he considered the risk. He scanned the sand table, noting the deep ravines and maze-like tunnels of the Ifan stronghold. The terrain was a natural fortress designed to swallow an invading army whole. Attacking without specialized heavy firepower would be a suicide mission. It will likely cause heavy casualties, but as a soldier, I must defend my country and do what must be done. I tensed up for 3 seconds before shouting out the order. Transmit my command to the 45th Corps of the 12th Division immediately. Tell the army to remember their duty and move out now. They must reach Sealy within 30 minutes and prepare for a full-scale assault on Ifan's gang. Split the forces into 3 routes to lock down the eastern bank and the 2 gorge passes. No one escapes. The order was issued, and the civil guard officer, Jose Luis Lopez, stood ready. The communications officer acted instantly to relay the signal. Was this tense, solemn atmosphere all we had left? The feeling of impending war began to spread through the room. Everything was moving too fast. I looked into Vice Commander Zhao's deep, calculating eyes. The sky outside the window was gradually fading into a bruised purple. I muttered to myself, tomorrow is the deadline for my meeting with Xiao Chun. He's supposed to finish the special warhead, but I don't know if he'll actually succeed. Even if he finishes, a few sample warheads won't be enough to change the tide. We need at least 2 more days for mass production, but time has completely run out. Suddenly, the roar of an incredibly fast business jet cut through the air, and Xiao looked up. The phone beside him rang as the police commander headed toward the station house. Elon looked up from the sand table as the commander stood there in total silence. Ofa picked up the phone and heard a familiar voice on the other end. Hello, comrade, the voice said. This is Xiao Chun from the Findu Armament Factory. I'm looking for Vice Commander Xiao. Xiao Chun, it's me, Xiao Yun-san. Why are you calling so late? Is there a problem with the development? If you're having any difficulties, please tell me, and I will definitely help you resolve them. Reporting, Commander, I wanted to inform you that both types of warheads have been successfully developed. We are ready for launch tests at any time. The commander's eyes twitched in shock at how fast he'd worked. I was secretly alarmed. Saying they'd be ready in 3 days was already pushing it. He finished them in 2.5 days, which is simply unbelievable. But it's a shame that even though they're ready, there's no time for mass production. The campaign against the bandits in Sealy is starting now, so these won't help much. A few test samples can't eliminate thousands of bandits, especially when they're all hidden deep in tunnels and caves. The commander pulled himself back to reality. He spoke into the receiver with a booming voice. Listen to me. Little Chun, congratulations, you've achieved a brand new merit for the country. Regarding the tests tonight, I hesitated for a moment, still feeling a bit reluctant. I decided to ask a follow-up question just to be sure. You mentioned the blast radius of these special warheads is much larger than ordinary ones. Exactly what level are we talking about? I asked, my voice rising with anticipation. Xiao Chen's voice on the other end was sharp and full of energy as he answered. Commander, the special warheads I developed come in 2 distinct types. The one with the massive blast radius is called a thermobaric bomb. It has a lethal range of over 1 kilometer using a 750 millimeters caliber. Using the Type 19 rocket launcher as the delivery vehicle, it can fire 2 missiles simultaneously, and I have 4 ready to go. 2 rapid-fire rounds in just 2 minutes can wipe out everything in a 5-kilometer range. The commander flinched so hard the phone nearly flew out of his hand. His throat went bone dry in an instant. This was on a completely different level of destruction. It made the B-4 heavy howitzer look like a toy in comparison. I realized only a legendary super bomb could achieve this kind of lethality. What kind of monster has Xiao Chen created? I wondered, trying to keep my cool. I maintained a calm exterior, but inside, my heart was racing like a wild animal. My pulse thundered against my ribs as I processed the numbers. I've fought in countless battles throughout my life, but this was something else entirely. In all my years, I had never seen a weapon this ferocious. Is this kid on the phone joking? I thought, trying to suppress the shock in my heart. I asked him again. Xiao Chun, I remember you saying something earlier. You said this thermobaric bomb causes extreme physical damage, even to enemies hiding in tunnels. Yes, he replied, after it detonates. The bomb produces a shockwave of 2,500 degrees, depleting every drop of oxygen. Breathing becomes impossible. The oxygen stays gone for 10 minutes, suffocating anyone the blast didn't already vaporize. Xiao Chen's voice was calm, but his words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. My heart felt like it was about to explode as the reality of the coming war set in. Everything was ready to begin, but listening to him felt like a fever dream. If I hadn't seen the Type 19 rocket launcher with my own eyes, I would have assumed the person on the other end of the line was insane. I would have thought he was calling me from a padded cell in a psychiatric ward. A patient being studied by doctors, not a genius engineer. Despite my experience as a high-ranking commander, I still couldn't be entirely sure if what Xiao Chen said was even possible. It was too outrageous to believe, yet I was desperate enough to hope it was true. I sighed deeply, my entire understanding of warfare being challenged in a single call. I shook my head slowly, thinking, this is just too much to process. It was mysterious, as if I had just encountered a ghost from another world. Like someone suddenly appearing out of nowhere to tell me they'd built a super bomb. He mentioned it casually, noting that the secret room 15 meters underground, where Fei Shou was hiding, was well within the blast radius, right in the effective kill zone of his thermobaric weapon. Xiao Chen didn't care that he was speaking to a high-ranking official over the phone. He didn't care that I was Vice Commander Zhao. He just answered me seriously. He explained that at that depth, with so many semi-enclosed structures, the oxygen levels would be the deciding factor. The secret room might hold enough air for 10 minutes of survival, and the people inside could live, provided the energy flow stabilized. Eventually, the air currents would shift and the oxygen concentration underground would return to normal levels. But that would only happen after those 10 minutes passed. However, I realized his communication system was capable of much more than talk. Then he said, I developed another way. A bunker buster designed to strike specific targets hidden deep within properties, whether they are deep underground or buried inside mountains. It allows for a precise, surgical removal of the enemy. The maximum drilling depth is 60 meters. Once I have the specific intel on Faisal's underground secret room, I can carry out a rapid decapitation strike. Vice Commander Zhao froze, and his phone hit the table with a loud thud. The sharp sound jolted his nerves, and he scrambled to grab the receiver again. He tried to speak, but the words died in his throat. A rocket launcher that can strike 60 meters deep? Am I the one going crazy, or is Xiao Chun? Commander Long just sat there, rubbing his eyebrows in silence. He checked the time. The 45th Army was about to reach their combat positions. The Eifin Fortress was a malignant tumor on Jianzhou's neck. It had to be cut out tonight, no matter the cost in blood. Peace had to be restored to the camp's surroundings. The only sound in the room was the faint, rhythmic ticking of the pocket watch inside the commander's sleeve. Commander Xiao Fu's large, calloused hand clenched and unclenched, as if he were weighing a heavy decision in his heart. Seconds later, he spoke in a low, gravelly voice. Comrade Chenze, if I assigned you a critical combat mission right now, would you dare to accept it? Marshal Long's eyes snapped toward Commander Xiao Fu before I could even respond. The weight behind those words was unmistakable. If I accepted right then and there, knowing old Zhao style, he would actually pull the trigger. He'd deploy this unverified experimental weaponry into active combat. But my claims were so idealistic. If anything went wrong and civilians were hurt, everything would be ruined. He expected me to hesitate and consider the risks. Instead, my sharp, immediate response came through the line. Reporting to Commander Xiao Fu, this is Engineer Chun Zhe of the Findu Armament Factory. The Findu Armament Factory and the Type 191 rocket are ready for combat at any moment. That clean, sharp answer showed my absolute confidence in the equipment. Commander Xiao Fu got the result he wanted and looked at me with even more respect. He turned his head toward Marshal Long, his brother-in-arms of many years. They shared a silent, heavy understanding that didn't need words. Marshal Long nodded, trusting Xiao Fu's judgment despite only knowing me through stories. Xiao Fu clearly intended to use my thermobaric and bunker-busting bombs in this very battle. Things had reached a critical point where trust was the only currency left. It was a gamble they had to take. Commander Xiao Fu locked eyes with Marshal Long one last time. He took a deep breath and spoke loudly into the receiver. I am issuing the order. Engineer Chun Zhe, in 10 minutes, you will use the Type 191 system to join the suppression mission. Wipe out the bandits at Eifin Fortress immediately and launch your strike. Bring peace back to the people of Xiaoyanglan. I paused for a split second. Then I shouted back with a voice that nearly cracked. Yes, sir. Commander Xiao Fu continued. Xiao Chun, those bandits at Blind Man's Ridge number nearly 8,000. They were puppet troops for the invaders, committing atrocities against our people. Every last one of them must die. Eradicate this evil without mercy. Understood. Standing in my office at the Findu factory, I straightened my back and gripped the phone tight. My breathing grew heavy and ragged. The blood in my veins began to boil with a sudden, violent heat. I had only intended to report that the special warhead was finished. But this sudden combat mission woke something deep inside my soul. Our nation has endured far too much disaster and suffering. The weight of it all pressed down on me. For the last 100 years, foreign powers have kept their boots on our necks. Our mountains were shattered, and our ancestral temples were torn down. Even the invaders dared to trample our dignity while traitors ran wild. Puppets and sellouts were everywhere, mocking 5,000 years of civilization. We were on the verge of being erased from history. The brand of a lost nation was about to be seared into our skin. It was meant to be a permanent mark of shame on every Chinese face. But in our darkest hour, countless patriots chose to fight to the death. The Chinese will is vigorous, indestructible, and rising again. Our nation is being reborn from the ashes. Yet these traitors at Eifin still act as butchers. They serve as the blades for our enemies during this national crisis. Death is too good for them. It cannot redeem their sins. Even in hell, they deserve to suffer 1,000 cuts. My hand gripped the phone so hard it creaked, blue veins bulging against my skin. I swore a silent oath. I will personally send every single one of you traitors to your graves. You turned your backs on your own people. I'll make sure you and the beasts you serve rot in hell. Shinja and Commander Shao finished their brief call. The line went dead, leaving a heavy silence in the office. Yin Yuchu and Masterly stood right behind me. That strange, unidentified object still sat there on the chair. The entire group stared at me, their eyes filled with deep, unspoken admiration. Just moments ago, I had been describing the raw power of our new weaponry to Commander Shao. The airburst explosives and armor-piercing rounds had left them all speechless. And now, I had been handed a critical combat mission. You have to understand how rare this is. No piece of equipment ever goes straight to the front lines. Not without months of rigorous field testing. But Commander Shao had placed all his chips on me. One of them hesitated for a second before stepping toward the door. It was Ollie, ready to help me see this mission through to the end. The sudden weight of the task turned the office air thick and electric. A crushing pressure, like the calm before a devastating storm, swallowed the room. Masterly didn't say a word. He just kept his eyes locked on me. Shao-chun, I only had 10 minutes to get everything ready for the trade. I told myself to hurry up and get moving. Everyone rushed out of the office and headed straight for Workshop 17. Throughout the day, I had been preparing for this moment. We began installing the specialized gear onto the launcher vehicle. I loaded the rocket launcher boxes equipped with the special warheads. I jumped into the driver's seat, slammed the accelerator, and roared out of the workshop. I pulled into the open space outside and began a meticulous inspection. I checked every inch of the vehicle and the launch platform. I double-checked the missile boxes one last time. Real combat isn't like target practice. There's no room for error. I couldn't leave a single hidden danger behind, and Masterly knew it. Yin Yuchu jumped in to lend a hand, and in less than 5 minutes, everything was ready for the coming slaughter. The great battle was about to begin for those traitors who sold out our nation. Every single one of them had to die. In the village, a massive force of men deployed to every high point and hiding spot. The entire area was crawling with those bastards. Over 100 fierce bandits stood around yawning, waiting for the nightly speech. It was just before the departure. The boss hadn't arrived yet, so they were taking advantage of the downtime. They were chatting amongst themselves, talking casually. They talked about everything and anything. Ever since the independent troops were wiped out and the enemy occupied Jinzhou, it had been a few months of silence. The boss hasn't let us go out to do any activities, and it's been incredibly frustrating. The target this time is Tuyao Village, and I heard there are some pretty young wives in that town. TSK, 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 sounds perfect. They look appetizing, but you're a lustful dog. Careful the old man doesn't cut you with a knife. Nonsense. I'll go in and kill the men first. Then I'll enjoy myself. Say no more. I'm already finished. I'm practically drooling over here. Then, the moment arrived. The noisy crowd suddenly fell silent, though no one knew exactly when. A robust figure stood before the mob. Look out. Cruel, bloodthirsty eyes scanned the land. They surveyed the entire place. The moment the gates shifted, the doors of hell opened. The moment those bandits locked eyes with the second chief, the atmosphere turned lethal. They lowered their heads, not daring to look him in the eye. The second chief stood with his hands behind his back and spoke coldly. Brothers, tonight marks a turning point. It's the first time we've gone out to kill in months. Tighten your laces. This victory will be won on the edge of a blade. Collect our brothers from Tuyao and Ateo Wazi, then retreat immediately. An icy glint flashed in his eyes as he gripped his Mauser pistol. A deafening shot suddenly rang out, jolting every napping bandit awake. Anyone who disobeys orders gets a bullet for breakfast on the spot. The 100 bandits stood terrified and silent as a grave. We're going to see if those redbeards actually have the guts to show up. Keep your eyes wide open, because once we find them, we wipe them all out. The second chief finished his speech, raised his arm, and screamed, "Kill!" The bandits immediately began their march toward the town. They roared, "Kill! Kill! Kill!" until the sound rose like a tidal wave. It was an endless, bloodthirsty chant from every man there. Their throats were raw, their faces twisted with excitement. Kill! 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 As the shouting continued, the second chief's eye twitched and his face tightened. He spoke up once more, his voice cutting through the noise. Don't think we're at the bottom just because we're bandits now. The Japanese will return soon, and when they do, we'll be the heroes. Open your throats and scream it. Show me your strength. The men roared back, their cries turning into a chaotic, violent mess. The second chief's face darkened, turning as black as the bottom of a soot-covered pot. Which bastard is it? You can't even shout a slogan right. How are you supposed to be useful? If I didn't need every man right now, I'd gun you idiots down myself. Enough shouting. Wait here. We move out for Tuyao Village in 10 minutes. Meanwhile, 15 meters underground in a secret chamber in Ifan, the great chief, Siba Olan, lay carelessly across a fur-lined divan. He held an opium pipe in his hand, looking completely at ease. He exhaled a thick cloud of smoke, a look of pure satisfaction on his face. Beside him, a woman dressed in a thin silk jumpsuit moved gracefully. She used her pale, slender arms to massage his head and shoulders. Olan leaned back, soaking in the luxury of his hidden bunker. Do you really think those fools are going to pull this off? The Japanese are the ones who've truly run out of luck and money. Are they really coming back? It's been 4 years, and we haven't heard a single word. Jun Zimina looked at Siba Olan with hidden contempt while speaking with a sweet voice. She leaned in close, her movements calculated and soft. Our imperial army is still out there. The Japanese will definitely return for us. We will reclaim the glory that belongs to us. A land this rich deserves to be ruled by people like us. She spoke of the Japanese as if they were gods. Siba Olan nodded, knowing he and his brothers had already spilled too much blood for them to ever turn back. They were monsters now, with no choice but to pray for a Japanese return. Beautiful, pour me another drink, make me feel good. But at the foot of the mountain, a force of 30,000 men was silently closing in. They moved like shadows, wearing dog fur hats and heavy padded military coats. These soldiers were vigorous and fast, taking their positions with lethal precision. They chambered their rounds, the metallic clicks echoing the coming slaughter. Listen up and pay attention. Tens of thousands of our brothers have been butchered by these traitors over the years. We have all been victims of their twisted games and cruelty. They've murdered, burned, and looted. Their crimes are too many to count. They're worse than the Japanese, worse than wild beasts. In today's battle, we must wipe them out completely. Li Dachuan's sharp gaze swept over the soldiers, demanding absolute silence. Even if your faces turn pale, do not make a single move. If you have to defecate, do it in your pants. You don't move. The moment the first shot rings out, the entire army advances as planned. Li Dachuan turned to the comms officer and barked, "Use the radio now. Contact the rear station and report to the Jingzhou Field Army Headquarters. Tell them the 45th Army is ready to launch the assault on Black Wind Ridge." The news reached the base quickly, and I, as Air Force Deputy Commander, hung up the phone. I looked over at Marshal Lon and gave him the signal. "Old Lon, everything is in place." Marshal Lon saw the look of confidence on my face and smiled. He nodded calmly and said, "Good, then let's fight." I immediately placed a call to the Findu Armament Factory. Outside Workshop 17, the team was waiting in the open air. Chen Tse, Lu Se, Master Li, and the reinforcements had all gathered. They stood in total silence, waiting for the phone to ring. Lu Se was so worried about a delay that she'd taken drastic measures. She had the technicians run the office phone line directly out to the field. The atmosphere outside Workshop 17 was thick with anticipation. Even in the freezing, pitch-black night, the tension only grew tighter. Everyone's faces were flushed red, oblivious to the biting cold. I wondered if the mission had changed. Why hadn't the call come yet? Suddenly, the phone rang, and Lu Se snatched it up instantly. She shoved the receiver into Chen Tse's hand. Chen Tse pressed it to his ear, and I spoke firmly into the line. "Commander Xiao, this is Chen Tse. The rocket operation is a go. Remote Recon Unit 19 is locked and ready." I told him, "Initiate the ground assault immediately. I hope the results are as beautiful as your promise. Listen to my command. Strike the fortress now." The target was Black Wind Ridge, 480 kilometers away. Chen Tse's heart hammered against his ribs like a drum. The sound of his own pulse was deafening in his ears. This was his first time executing a real-world combat mission. He was nervous, but the excitement made his blood feel like it was boiling. A fire was lighting up inside him as he thought of the enemy. Every invader and traitor deserved nothing but death. He shouted the order, "Unit 19, launch." I climbed into the launch vehicle in 3 quick steps and hit the ignition. The engine coughed to life, sending a dull vibration through the mechanical frame. I looked at the crowd and shouted, "Everyone, back up." The onlookers looked both restless and electrified. They scrambled back, giving the machine the space it needed. These weren't the standard rockets you'd see on a NASA pad. The setup for this launch was worlds apart from our previous tests. Before, the platform was built for volume. It used to hold 3 modules with 10 conventional 300mm rockets. Now, there were only 2 modules, housing 2 massive thermobaric rockets. Each 750mm warhead radiated a sense of absolute, lethal power. Under 1,000 watchful eyes, the enormous warheads began to rise. They stood like giant pillars, while Li Shifu and the crew adjusted the vehicle's tilt. Every face in the crowd was etched with awe and gravity. Zhou Zhen stood there, staring blankly as he whispered to himself. He couldn't take his eyes off the steel giants. He looked like he was witnessing a miracle he couldn't comprehend. "Why aren't they launching at an angle?" he muttered. "Why are these 2 monsters standing perfectly vertical? Only the world's most advanced ballistic missiles are capable of a vertical launch. Perfectly vertical. What I was developing wasn't just some simple project. Someone else in the crowd watched in total shock, unable to believe it was a rocket launcher. "If that's just a rocket launcher, I'll cut off my head and use it as a urinal," he barked. Li Shifu and Lucy stood there, completely stunned. Everything they knew about engineering was being shattered in real time. Yin Yuchu shouted for everyone to cover their ears as the launch sequence began. I took a deep breath and raised my hand over the controls. I slammed my palm down on the green button with a heavy thud. The vehicle fell into a brief, agonizing silence for a few seconds. A crushing sense of pressure washed over the crowd, making their skin crawl. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as the energy built. The ground beneath the tires began to vibrate with a dense, low hum. The air around the platform turned scorching hot and turbulent. In an instant, the atmosphere turned violent. Lucie's pupils contracted in fear as he let out a scream. "Here it comes," he yelled just as the twin exhaust ports ignited. A blinding, dazzling red light exploded from the back of the vehicle. Furious flames erupted as the massive warheads tore into the sky. The thunderous roar nearly pierced my eardrums as the backblast hit the earth. A dense cluster of red Mach rings was visible to the naked eye. Boom, boom, boom. The sonic booms echoed right from the start. The entire sky seemed to let out a strained groan as the air temperature skyrocketed. The smell of scorched earth and burning ozone filled the air. Across the entire weapons factory, Lucii stared at the sky, frozen in place. His face was stiff and his chin trembled as he whispered, "My God, it's supersonic." The sound barrier didn't stand a chance, and then my voice cut through the noise. "Move it. Swap in the other two thermobaric rocket modules now." The sound of my command snapped everyone back to reality. By the time they shook off the shock, I had already jumped down from the vehicle. Yuchu rushed over to help while Lucii and Master Li scrambled forward too. But they couldn't even find a way to lend a hand. Trying to jump in blindly would have only made things worse. Yuchu and I worked the adjustment system, rapidly locking the two side pods onto the platform. With a few sharp clicks, the module swap was complete in less than 60 seconds. Master Li's face twitched as he watched us work with such precision. He looked like he'd just seen a miracle happen right before his eyes. The Russian Katyusha takes forever to reload. Even a standard missile takes 30 minutes, but our Type 19 is on another level. I climbed back into the cockpit, adjusted the impact point slightly, and slammed my finger down on the launch button once again. Boom, boom, boom. Two more warheads screamed toward their target. They made an emergency ascent into the distance as I turned to Yuchu. Yuchu, swap the module now. We loaded the bunker buster crate, and with Master Li's help, we were even faster this time. Meanwhile, at the village on Siatsi Hill, over 100 bandits waited for the order to move. They were chatting carelessly, laughing about the raid to come. The second leader said no one escapes today, one of them bragged. "We're bringing back 30 hostages, no matter what. We'll have our fun with them once we're back at the fort." "Yeah, how could I forget that?" another sneered. "Wait, what is that?" a bandit named Lu Xine asked, pointing upward. The rest of the battalion followed his gaze toward the horizon. The same confusion filled all their eyes as they spotted 2 points of light. They were blindingly bright, dragging visible trails across the sky. They were closing in at a terrifying speed. Someone shouted excitedly, "It's a meteor shower. Brothers, make a wish." The second and third leaders stood there, watching the lights grow larger. They stood shoulder to shoulder, completely unaware of what was coming. But they didn't have much time left. They started screaming hysterically, "It's an enemy attack. Get to the bunkers. Hide now." Those with quick reflexes scrambled into the caves and tunnels. In seconds, they were all huddled deep inside the earth. Shouts of lingering terror echoed through the dark. Mother of God, what was that? What kind of weapon is that? God knows, it's massive. It's definitely powerful, but we're safe here in the Behar tunnel. We've been holding back for so long. The bandits started to relax as they reached the end of the tunnel. One of them sighed. "I really thought I could kidnap a young girl to blow off some steam tonight, but I guess there's no hope." Suddenly, a deafening roar like a jet engine tore through the air. A muffled, bone-shaking explosion cut his words short. Those were the last words he ever spoke as a massive vibration swept through the tunnel, bringing a suffocating pressure with it. The blast wave engulfed the Black Wind Fortress, leaving a faint, sweet scent in the air. Time seemed to slow down as the second leader, also in the tunnel, shifted his eyes. He let out a mocking laugh. "I thought it was a powerful weapon. Is that it?" That little shake wasn't any stronger than one of my farts. Every single one of them let out a long sigh. The heartless bandits grinned, laughing so hard they doubled over, clutching their stomachs. But in that exact moment, waves of red smoke erupted across the Black Wind Fortress. A terrifying power far beyond the first blast tore through the sky as high-temperature shockwaves swept the area. The heat vaporized everything it touched, and the bandits on the surface died before they could even scream. Then, it reached the ones hiding deep underground. The massive explosion sent shockwaves that literally shook them into pieces. The triumphant smiles on the leaders' faces froze as their skin began to burst, inch by inch, into bloody burns. They looked horrific as they clawed desperately at their own throats, tearing through their flesh. They tried to breathe, but their throats were already filling with fluid. Blisters formed instantly as they gasped for air. Every breath scorched their lungs because the oxygen had been completely consumed. Faint cries of "save me" vanished in seconds as the bandits in the deep tunnels struggled against the vacuum. Their legs kicked and their toes tensed. Then they went completely still, even 15 meters underground. In the secret chamber, the leader Xie Baolong bolted upright in his bed. The room shook so violently he lost his balance, his face turning pale with shock. He shouted in a panic, "This is bad. An earthquake. Junci, run." The woman beside him, Junci, hurriedly wrapped a sable fur around her pale, delicate body. She trembled and asked, "Darling, could we be under attack?" "Don't be ridiculous," he snapped. "This room is 15 meters deep and impossible to find." This is the safest place in the whole village. Unless they have some kind of human-headed superbomb, nothing could reach us here. But the next second, I heard the sound of wet, dripping footsteps in the hallway. Xie Baolong peered through the peephole, sweat beading on his forehead. A subordinate was out there, covered in so much blood I couldn't even see his face. He crawled toward the door, stumbling and screaming in a mangled voice. "Big boss, help. The tunnels, everyone is dead. Save me, I don't want to die." The man's body finally gave out, and he collapsed, dead on the floor. Xie Baolong's face twitched as he gripped the door of the secret room. He turned to Junxiai, who was still frantically trying to dress herself. "Damn it, the official army has gone insane. They're using super bombs." Junxiai froze, pure horror flashing in her eyes as the fear pierced her to the bone. Cold sweat soaked her back as she remembered the stories of total destruction. Years ago, the Yankees used only 2 super bombs to wipe out 2 entire cities. A peasant army like ours stands no chance against that kind of warfare. How could they have built a super bomb of their own? How could they possess such a terrifying weapon? She tried to calm Xie Baolong down, telling him not to be afraid. "As long as the green hills remain, we'll never lack for firewood," she whispered. "As long as we don't die, we can definitely rise again." As she spoke, her eyes burned with an intense, simmering resentment. She gritted her teeth and glared with a ferocious look, cursing those damn peasants. "Vile, ugly people, they've made things so difficult for me today. I won't be the one to die," Junxiai thought. "It'll be you lot tomorrow." But before she could finish her thought, the secret chamber began to rumble. A massive explosion roared through the underground bunker once more. Dust filled the air as the walls began to crack and buckle violently. The words she wanted to say were suddenly cut off. They stuck in her throat like she'd swallowed 1,000 steel needles. She couldn't speak, she couldn't swallow, and her expression began to shift. She became hysterical, her eyes wide with a mix of pure terror and madness. The ceiling of the secret chamber began to split apart, inch by inch. A dark, jagged crack opened up right above them. A blinding, dazzling light started to pour through the gap. It was a fiery red glow, as if they were holding the sun right over their heads. The terrifying shockwave of the blast expanded through the underground room. In that split second, a dazed Junxiai thought she saw Lemaire. The Emperor was there, smiling right at her. "Emperor, have you come to take me?" she whispered as the light consumed everything. Her dark body was caught in the strangling grip of the shockwave, decomposing into rotten bone and minced meat. Not a single trace was left behind, as if Eva Olan had never even existed. She stood no chance against that level of raw destruction. In that final second, the bomb's full force surged forward like a violent parade of fire. Desperate to survive, she lunged with everything she had left. She threw herself toward the exit, but the moment her head cleared the opening, her body gave way. The princess's head poked out of the secret chamber just as the shockwave slammed into her frame. Only her head remained intact while the rest of her was pulverized instantly. Her entire body turned into jagged fragments amidst the thunderous, blunt force explosions. The blasts were continuous, and Yin Lan watched it all unfold from the black wind for. A fierce, dark red light illuminated the entire night sky. In the middle of that pitch-black night, a massive cloud of fire began to take shape, rising high and spreading across the southern horizon. It swallowed the sky whole. I stared at the rising fire cloud in the distance, my eyes tracking the destruction. My heart hammered against my ribs as I gripped the controls with my rough, calloused hands. Sweat poured down my face, and my expression grew cold and heavy. I froze, wondering just how long this inferno would burn. I swallowed hard, remembering my orders. Ensure that not a single man makes it out alive. The plan was to wait for the military artillery to launch the first volley of rocks. 10 minutes later, the ground troops would unleash their own weapons. The first round of the bombardment finally came to an end. The clouds of fire settled completely, and the path to Izenzai City lay open. I knew there would still be survivors as the soldiers stared at the fiery clouds. They stood there stunned, their eyes filled with confusion and pure shock. These men had fought so many wars over the years, but they had never seen an artillery strike of this magnitude. The 10 minutes flew by, and Li Dachuan suddenly raised his hand toward the sky. He pulled the trigger, using the gunshot as the signal to advance. 30,000 men began their march toward the city. They moved rapidly, pushing straight toward the city center. I watched Feng Zai in the distance as the engines roared to life. Countless enemies were already howling in fear, desperate to find a way to retreat from the carnage. It was as if my soldiers had been injected with pure adrenaline. I watched them charge forward with everything they had. These were Chinese soldiers. Not a single one of them took a step back. However, there are always a few loudmouth braggarts in any army. As they charged, they shouted back and forth to their comrades. They were all asking the same thing. What kind of cannons were those? The power was simply too overwhelming to comprehend. "Who cares about the specs right now?" one soldier yelled. "You're wasting time worrying about the model of the gun. At least half the enemy died in that first wave of fire anyway." I noticed one man pushing forward harder than the rest. He was actually one of the army cooks. Someone mocked him, asking, "Why is a cook on the front lines?" He just gripped his weapon tighter and barked back, "What about it? I can slice blood sausage in the kitchen and slice bandits on the field." His iron armor gleamed with a cold, sharp light as he ran. The main army's advance didn't even feel like a battle anymore. They didn't encounter a single shred of resistance. In the blink of an eye, they stormed Izenzai, the air thick with the stench of scorched earth. The heat was so intense that soldiers were drenched in sweat, ripping off their helmets just to breathe. A scout ran up to the commander, reporting that the surface search was complete with no bandits found. The enemy on the surface had been turned to ash, and the caves held only piles of corpses. Then, a second report came in regarding a discovery in the central secret cave. Li Dachuan followed the soldier to a deep pit, stared at the carnage below, and exhaled slowly. As the soldiers began clearing the battlefield, they felt like they were in a trance. The victory was so absolute they felt like they were dreaming while they worked. Everything felt surreal and confusing. Li Dachuan adjusted his hat and looked out over the horizon. He saw the village of Ifan, completely leveled by our artillery fire, and his heart sank. But then, a wave of pure excitement washed over him. A single round of fire had wiped out every bandit within a 5-kilometer radius. What kind of god-tier equipment had I actually created for them? It was unbelievable, and the news of the victory was immediately sent back to base. Inside the Jianzhou Field Army Command Center, the atmosphere was tense. Vice Commander Xiao listened to the battlefield report over the phone in total silence. He didn't say a word for a long time. After 30 seconds, he finally hung up, his eyes trembling as he looked at Commander Long. Slowly, a look of wild ecstasy began to spread across both their faces. They clenched their fists so hard their arms started to shake with excitement. The course of the battle was nothing short of a fantasy, a single rocket bombardment. The fire had scorched the earth and collapsed every single bunker and tunnel. By the time the ground troops actually moved in, there was no one left to fight. They were just there to clean up the mess, having never seen a battle this easy in their lives. A roar of celebration suddenly ripped through the entire barracks. "General, let's celebrate properly," the BIC chief shouted. Commander Long was overflowing with emotion as he looked at the 21st Regiment's report. His hands, like iron pincers, suddenly gripped Vice Commander Zhao's shoulders. "Zhao, this is hilarious. This is brilliant," he laughed. In the old legends, Zhuge Liang had to borrow the eastern wind to win. But we have these rockets. Our gamble paid off. You won the night. Tonight's battle didn't just level the enemy's stronghold. It turned the ruins of Ifan village into a landmark of military history. The results of the actual combat were undeniable. The performance, power, and reliability of my rocket launcher were now proven facts. In the future, when we strike the poor islands, the Penglai system will definitely be our greatest asset. Vice Commander Xiao nodded in agreement. He added with pure joy in his voice. What's even rarer is that a massive talent has emerged from our own ranks. With me on their side, the rise of the province's power was no longer a dream. The new era of the Chinese military was right around the corner. He picked up the phone and dialed Director Liu, who nervously handed the receiver to me. Vice Commander Zhao's voice boomed. "Little Chun, the Black Wind Fortress is gone. Your bombs stole their very lives. Those thermobaric and bunker-buster bombs are incredibly powerful. The Black Wind Fortress was leveled, and that fat bastard Siva Olan is dead along with his men. Everything was wiped out on the spot. You're the hero of this battle, Shenzhe." My face lit up, my eyes shining as my breath hitched with excitement. After all, this was my very first time seeing my work used in a real mission. A real, live combat scenario. To say I wasn't nervous at all would be a total lie. "Thank you for the praise, Vice Commander Xiao," I replied. "It's late, so I won't bother you any longer," he said. "Your reward is coming soon, and in the future, if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to call me." I heard the line go dead on the other end. I slowly placed the receiver back onto the hook. Silence filled the room for a few seconds as the weight of the news sank in. Then, the joy on everyone's faces exploded into wild, ecstatic cheering. The people in those remote villages could finally live in peace and stability. Since I'm from the armament factory, this victory wasn't just mine. It belonged to the whole unit, and everyone would benefit from the glory. From now on, my colleagues and I will walk with our heads held high. They all rushed toward me, grabbing me and tossing me into the air with a roar. Master Li, Engineer Liu, and Yin Yuchu all joined in on the celebration. After the chaos died down, I finally stood firm on the ground again. Master Li approached me with a hesitant look on his face. He started to stutter. "Little Chun, I have a question. I'm not sure if I should even ask." "Ask whatever you like," I replied with a nod. Master Li rubbed his chin, deep in thought as he spoke. "I've worked on artillery development for many years, and I know a bit about rockets. But I've never heard of a warhead quite like this. How can a thermobaric bomb be this powerful? What's the principle behind it?" I turned serious and looked him in the eye. "The core principle lies in the secondary detonation," I explained. Yin Yuchu quickly stepped up beside me to help. "Brother Chin explained this to me before, so let me clarify," she said. "It uses a specialized casing to disperse fuel and materials into the air. The first blast spreads it over a massive area, and the second one ignites it all at once. It consumes every drop of oxygen, creating a total vacuum. A lethal, oxygen-free zone that lasts for about 10 minutes. Master Li listened intently, nodding as the realization hit him. He tried to process the meaning of my words, but his brain was nearly smoking. He still only half understood the concept. Those words sound incredibly complicated, Masterly muttered. Then he suddenly asked, but this oxygen-free environment, why does it last? How can it last for 10 minutes? Logically, within a few seconds. Fresh air should rush back in, right? Yin Yuchu gave him a look of mild disdain. The explosion consumes the oxygen, but it doesn't displace all the other gases. It doesn't create a massive vacuum, so there isn't a violent rush of air to fill it. It takes at least 10 minutes for the air to become breathable for a normal person again. Masterly froze for a moment, his face turning bright red. He realized his mistake immediately. He had just asked a question that sounded like it came from a schoolboy. Feeling embarrassed, he quickly changed the subject as we all chatted for a while. Engineer Liu and I agreed to visit the Type 19 rocket production line tomorrow. I needed to guide them through the final technical troubleshooting. Engineer Liu suggested that Yin Yuchu act as my temporary assistant for the task. Since we already had experience working together, it was the most efficient choice. It would make the entire process much smoother. Neither of us had any objections to the arrangement. I had no objection to the arrangement, and neither did Yin Yuchu. She was always incredibly diligent when it came to getting things done. She handled errands perfectly, making her the ideal person for Engineer Liu to choose. We all agreed to keep the details of tonight's combat test a secret for now. With the mission a success, I drove the Type 19 rocket launcher back to workshop number 6. The crowd finally began to disperse, and I planned to head back to the dorms for some rest. Chunzhe, wait a second, a voice called out from behind me. I stopped in my tracks and looked back toward the sound. I saw Yin Yuchu standing there, looking a bit hesitant. It's nothing, I just wondered if you'd walk with me for a while. I nodded, and the two of us started walking together. We moved side by side under the dim streetlights of the facility. The cold wind whipped around us, and though she was wrapped in a thick coat, she looked quite small. Her face was flushed bright red from the biting night air. She looked like she was struggling against the chill. Brother Chun, how is it that you know so much about everything? She asked. Why don't you study this hard? Sometimes I feel like we aren't even in the same league. I gave her a casual shrug as I replied. It's probably because I have the foundation my mother left me. Yin Yuchu smiled happily at my answer, her eyes brightening. She stole a glance at my profile and said, so your whole family is into scientific research? That's so impressive. My mother was killed by demons 5 years ago, and my father is a truck driver who just left for a long trip. It might be a while before he gets back, so I'm all alone at home right now. Hearing that, I felt a sudden pang of guilt for using her as my personal errand girl lately. Since we'd likely be working together on more R&D projects in the future, I figured I should probably start being a little nicer to her. Yin Yuchu's house was close to the factory. It took us about 10 minutes of walking to finally reach her front door. The windows were pitch black inside. She looked at me and asked, do you want to come in for a bit? No thanks, I replied. Maybe next time. I'm heading out. As I turned to leave, a small hand grabbed the edge of my sleeve. Brother Chun, wait, she said softly. Can you take me with you the next time you develop something? I promise I won't cause any trouble. I'll do whatever you need me to do. I'm very obedient, I swear. She looked anxious, her face tight with nerves as she gripped my clothes. Her other hand fidgeted restlessly, rubbing her fingers together. The test for the special warhead was officially over. The research team had dissolved, and she knew she hadn't contributed much to the actual engineering. She was alone, but she'd learned so much, it was a total revelation. I was clearly going places in the world of R&D, and she wanted to keep learning. If she couldn't be the pioneer, she was happy just being the witness. Besides, working on research with me actually made her happy. But she knew asking for a permanent spot was a lot to ask. She had no idea if I would even agree to it. When I heard her question, I didn't give her a straight answer. I just smiled, reached out, and pinched her soft, chubby cheek. You'll find out tomorrow, I said playfully. I turned around and walked away without another word. Yin Yuchu watched my retreating figure and touched her face where I'd pinched it. She pouted her red lips in frustration. He's such a tease, she muttered. If the answer is no, just say no. She figured she'd just have to ask Director Liu for help tomorrow instead. She was determined to stay by my side, one way or another. Meanwhile, at the Jianzhou Field Army Command Center, the atmosphere was heavy with the weight of ongoing operations. Vice Commander Xiao and Commander Long were finally finishing their paperwork. It was already well past midnight. Commander Long took a sip of tea and stretched his tired, aching eyes. Suddenly, a thought struck him, and he looked over at Vice Commander Xiao. Old Xiao, about my award application for Chunzhe. It's already been sent, right? You submitted it the day before yesterday, so we should see results in a day or two. Chunzhe has pulled off another massive achievement for us. I'm worried the previous reward won't be enough. He deserves even more. Should we submit another request? Commander Long asked, rubbing his stubbled chin. He stared into the dim light, his eyes bloodshot from staying up so late. He realized that in these early days of the nation, the economy was still fragile. Worse yet, there were still many enemy agents lurking in the shadows. Between internal reactionaries and foreign spies, the threat was constant. I believe it's absolutely necessary to send someone to protect Chunzhe's safety. Vice Commander Zhao's expression turned solemn as he nodded in agreement. You're right. We cannot allow anything to happen to a man like him. I'll dispatch a specialized security company immediately. They would provide 24-hour protection for me and my work. They'd be stationed near the armament factory, focusing on covert surveillance. A genius like me definitely wouldn't want a loud, visible escort following him around. With just a few words, the two commanders finalized the plan. That very night, a small, elite unit equipped with top-tier gear was mobilized. They moved into the abandoned houses near the factory to begin their watch. I arrived back at the Findu armament factory. Early the next morning, as soon as I stepped through the gates, I noticed something strange happening around the grounds. There were soldiers patrolling the factory, far more than I had ever seen before. Maybe the leadership realized the economy isn't the only thing that's fragile. They must be worried about spies causing trouble or hiding in the shadows. It looks like they've finally reinforced the security here. My defense was now their top priority. I followed the plan and headed to the workshop housing the main line. This was the production hub for the Type 19 rocket launchers. It sat deep within the heart of the armament factory. In this era, a place like this was as vital as any front line. The workshop was massive, long, wide, and incredibly spacious. I was surprised to see several idle lathes from Workshop 17 already moved in. Over 50 workers with honest, simple faces were already hard at work. The rhythmic clanging of metal filled the air as they labored since dawn. Suddenly, a booming voice called out to me from the side. I turned my head and saw Masterly walking toward me. He was flanked by a muscular brute on his left and a girl with a blue toolkit on his right. I smiled and waved, saying, "Masterly, please, there's no need for such a formal greeting." Masterly looked at me with a kind, fatherly expression. He laughed and told me not to be modest, insisting I call him oldly now that I was a director. I quickly shook my head, knowing Masterly had spent decades serving our military industry. He had given everything to this country, and there was no way I was going to address him so casually. I told him that wouldn't work, so we compromised. I'd call him Masterly, and he'd call me Chunze. Masterly smiled brightly, clearly pleased with the arrangement. "Why are you here so early?" he asked. "You must be exhausted after these last few days." He told me I needed to go back and get some proper rest. I told him it wasn't necessary, insisting my body was robust enough to handle the workload. But as I spoke, I caught sight of the 2-meter-tall giant standing behind him with explosive muscles. Even though it was the dead of winter, this guy was standing there in nothing but a thin tank top. Masterly laughed at my reaction and stepped forward to introduce us. This was Li Ran, the head of artillery production with 10 years of experience as a master turner. He introduced me as the senior engineer and the mind behind the Type 19 rocket launcher. We shook hands, and I couldn't help but admire the sheer physical presence of the man. Li Ran got straight to business, pointing toward the active production line. He told me they had already started building sections based on my detailed blueprints and diagrams. However, we hit a snag with the central control module for the Type 19's launch system. Scavenging vacuum tubes from old radios wasn't going to be enough for mass production. But then, we managed to track down a broken vacuum suction machine. We thought we could use it to manufacture vacuum tubes, but after 2 months of trying, we hit a wall. We spent half a day tinkering with it, only to realize it was a lost cause. "The machine is completely useless now," Masterly said, while Li Ran stood by his side. Li Ran let out a deep, resonant sigh that echoed through the workshop. "Our top technicians checked it, and the precision gears in the core are shattered. We need parts from abroad. Shipping them here would take at least a month," he added, as I felt my focus sharpen. A golden flash flickered in my eyes as I asked, "Where is the machine? Can you take me to it?" "It's right inside," they said, leading me into the heart of the factory. As we walked, workers on their breaks whispered to each other, stealing glances at me until we turned the corner. Suddenly, a vacuum suction machine over 2 meters tall loomed before me. Its massive white casing was covered in patches of rust. I knew that while transistors had been invented by now, they weren't widely available yet. The vacuum tube was still the most practical device for receiving and amplifying electrical signals. It was the beating heart of every piece of electronic equipment we had. I rubbed my hands together, feeling the itch to get to work. I stepped forward quickly and began manipulating the controls, testing the mechanisms. I looked back at Masterly and asked, "Masterly, why don't we just fix it ourselves?" Masterly looked surprised. "Engineer Chun, you know how to fix precision electronics too?" I kept my expression modest and replied, "I know a thing or two about it." Li Ran, standing nearby, reminded me that the teeth on the core gears were completely stripped. 7 or 8 of the teeth on this machine's core gears have been snapped off right at the base. Trying to dismantle it without damaging the other parts is nearly impossible. Without brand new gears, you can't fix this properly, especially with all this rust. A simple mechanical failure from lack of lubrication is one thing, but this is worse. I didn't bother explaining the concept further to them. Behind me, Yuchu helped me head back toward Workshop 17. I grabbed a wrench, a screwdriver, and a few other essential tools. Yuchu pulled out a heavy blue canvas bag. She set it down in front of me with a heavy, metallic thud. A flicker of quiet satisfaction shone in her eyes as she showed me the common tools she'd gathered. She had gone to the factory manager early this morning to request permission to follow me and learn. The manager told her he'd already decided she would be my assistant from now on. Knowing this was a rare opportunity, she had prepared everything I might need. My expression froze for a second as I looked at her. I realized then that she wasn't going anywhere. As I walked in, I noticed that canvas bag again. She had just set it down. I was curious to see exactly what was inside. I was about to take control of the situation. I looked at Yang Yuchu's small frame. I expected to find tools prepared for the dismantling process. She was ready to support me at every turn, this little girl. It was actually quite nice, so I opened the toolbox. But alongside the wrenches, there was a warm lunchbox. She told me it was breakfast, knowing I probably hadn't eaten. Don't overthink it, she said, looking away. I just brought it casually. Old Masterly stood nearby and muttered, "What about me? I'm an old man. I haven't had breakfast either. Look at me." He asked if she could give it to him instead, but her expression shifted. Yang Yuchu instantly put her small hands on her hips. She said seriously, "Masterly, you're a master technician. And besides, your stomach isn't in great shape. Eating too much makes your digestion difficult. It's actually better if you skip breakfast." Nearby, Danny caught the scent of the rice, swallowed hard, and walked away. He couldn't help but gape at her, stammering, "Me? Already?" But before he could get another word out, Yang Yuchu snapped. She shot him a look so fierce it could draw blood. He shut his mouth instantly and didn't say another word. Master Li and Danny exchanged a long, silent look. They let out a low, frustrated groan at the blatant favoritism. It couldn't be more obvious, but I just ignored them and reached out. I pulled a specialized screwdriver from the toolbox and began the teardown. I started with the vacuum absorption machine's outer casing. The rhythmic clicking sound immediately caught Danny's attention. He leaned his massive head in close to get a better look at my hands. His eyes widened in shock at the sight of my tool. What kind of magic screwdriver was this? The screws practically flew out the moment the tip touched them. I noticed Danny's intense gaze and flashed a small smile. "Team leader," I said, "you want to give it a shot?" His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated curiosity. He nodded vigorously, his eyes never leaving the tool. To a mechanical production worker, a tool like this is a dream. The attraction was stronger than anything else in the world. I didn't say a word and simply handed the tool over. It was a high-quality, precision screwdriver. I placed it directly into Danny's waiting hand. He took it with total confidence and began working with pure passion. As he worked, a deep sense of gratitude began to swell. His respect for me grew stronger with every passing second. To a technician, their custom tools are their most prized possessions. They are their lifeblood. 10 years ago, a master wouldn't even let you look at his tools, let alone use them, but I was different. I selflessly let him test this top-tier modified tool however he liked. He thought I was a saint as he finally got into the zone. His disassembly speed increased exponentially. He was moving incredibly fast now. I skillfully picked up my lunchbox to start eating. While I ate, I gave the team leader a quick reminder. "Don't worry about breaking anything," I said. "The external casing of this vacuum machine has plenty of screws to practice on. By the way, check the rest of the kit. There are custom wrenches in there you should try too." I tore through my breakfast box until it was licked clean. I let out a burp and looked over at Danny. In that short time, he had already stripped down most of the vacuum machine. He reached the central core and started working with extreme caution. One wrong move now, and the entire machine would be scrap metal. After a few minutes of hesitation, Danny finally stopped his hands. "It's no use," he muttered. "Any method I try here will destroy the core. I can't take it apart any further," he sighed. I stepped in immediately and said, "Let me try." Danny warned me that he had already tried every possible angle. He insisted the part was completely jammed. But before he could even finish his sentence, I had already pulled the core out. The component was fully disassembled. Danny stared at me, his mind racing frantically. He looked at the solder joints and wondered what had just happened. He hadn't seen my movements clearly at all. I had dismantled the piece in 3 seconds without a single scratch. He rubbed his eyes hard and took a deep breath. He locked his gaze on my next move, desperate to see the trick. The next part was also a critical component, and he wasn't going to blink. Danny's face twisted into a mask of pure confusion. His muscles were trembling wildly as he stood there frozen. 10 years of experience as a master technician couldn't help him make sense of this. He swallowed hard, forced a shaky smile, and pointed at the final core component. I stepped aside and let him take the lead for the last piece. Danny moved forward, took a deep breath, and handled the electrical part with extreme care. He tried to mimic my technique, pressing gently against the rear center axis. With a soft click, the final component came apart in his hands. He stared at the piece, muttering to himself, How is this happening?" I decided to break it down for him. "There's a small protrusion on that electrical piece," I explained. "It's designed to lock the entire assembly into a specific position. That's why you couldn't see a way to pull it out normally. If you don't hit the release, the core stays jammed. Force it, and the whole thing snaps. It requires absolute precision. You have to hold it at a fixed angle. Then you install the L piece on the rear axis to complete the alignment. Without that exact sequence, disassembly is impossible." Danny slowly pulled the electrical piece away, finally understanding the trick. He examined it carefully and saw that I was right. There was a tiny protrusion, just as I described, and he began to mutter to himself. "A tiny bump like this, it's exactly what I saw in the video." In reality, that one small detail changed everything. I nodded, knowing the current equipment was sophisticated, but soon vacuum tubes would be replaced by transistors. Large-scale integrated circuits would emerge, and the level of industrial sophistication would skyrocket. Precision would move from micrometers down to nanometers. Danny listened, only half understanding, but feeling deeply impressed as he looked at me with newfound admiration. He had heard the rumors about me a few days ago and thought they were exaggerated. But seeing me in person, he realized the stories didn't even do me justice. Even if the vacuum absorption machine couldn't be fixed in the end, witnessing my hand of God technique was worth it. This level of non-destructive disassembly was already more than enough to leave him completely stunned. The hardest part of the teardown was finally finished. I handled the rest of the components in the blink of an eye. I placed the damaged core gear onto the workbench. It sat there, revealing its 8 broken gear teeth. "This is shocking," Danny said, leaning in closer. "Look at the material of this gear. It's high-grade, acid-resistant steel. It has high resistance, and while our modified lathe can handle the precision." Masterly, standing beside me, noted that this specific steel isn't available in China yet. We could try to source the raw steel, or even the finished gears directly from Europe. But as he spoke, he grit his teeth in frustration. The words practically hissed out. Those foreign suppliers are nothing but greedy vultures. They aren't just inflating prices, they're mocking us on the open market. They attach impossible conditions, treating us like fools who have no other choice. I listened to him, my expression calm, because none of this surprised me. The Western market is a pack of hounds that won't stop until they've picked the bone clean. I turned to the group leader and asked him to head to Workshop 17. I needed them to bring my specialized welding equipment to me immediately. Old Master Lee's cloudy eyes suddenly flashed with a sharp, golden realization. He spun around to face me, his mind racing with the possibilities. "Shunzai, do you mean to tell me you can repair this gear with that welding system?" "I can," I replied, my voice steady and filled with absolute conviction. Danny looked back and forth between Master Lee and me, completely lost. He was baffled. He had never even heard of a welding technique that precise. Master Lee just smiled and gave Danny's muscular bicep a reassuring pat. "Don't worry, Danny, you'll see exactly how it's done in a moment." As they left to get the gear, Master Lee and I began prepping the workspace. I positioned the damaged gear on the workbench to make the repair easier. Everything was set for the welding operation to begin. 10 minutes later, heavy, thundering footsteps echoed through the workshop. It was Danny, lugging the MIG welder and the gas cylinder toward me. I took a deep breath, impressed by his sheer strength. With everything ready, I rolled up my sleeves and gripped the welding torch. I pulled down my mask and sparks began to fly in every direction. I fused the first 2 points, then moved steadily to the next. Suddenly, I remembered to warn Master Lee and Danny to look away. I didn't want the intense glare of the sparks to burn their eyes. They both obeyed instantly, turning their heads to the side. The actual welding took less than 10 minutes to complete. The 8 damaged tooth positions were now covered in layers of fresh weld beads. The raw iron sat there, glowing and uneven. Master Lee stared at the gears I had just worked on, his expression unreadable. His mouth twitched with a hint of doubt. The gear looked uglier now than before. Danny looked at the mess and assumed I had failed the task. He started stammering, trying to find a way to comfort me in my defeat. "It's okay, Shunzai, it doesn't matter," he muttered softly. I just let a mysterious smile play on my lips and told him not to worry. I explained that this was called overlay welding. Once it cooled naturally, I could mount it right onto the lathe. Danny stood there with his chin in his hand, processing my words. His face went pale, and his chest muscles actually twitched with nerves. He looked like he was about to have a panic attack right in front of Master Lee. His breathing started to pick up, coming in short, jagged gasps. He stammered, "Shunzai, you can't be serious about this." He thought I was going to turn these raw weld spots into gear teeth on a lathe. "This is my way," I told him, but he just kept shaking his head. Danny waved his hands frantically, his eyes filled with pure conflict. He argued that the hardness of the weld points was far lower than the original steel. Even if I could shape them, they wouldn't hold up under the machine's pressure. He warned me that the welded teeth would wear down in seconds. If that happened, the damage to the entire machine would double instantly. He begged me to think it over, terrified I was about to scrap the whole thing. Master Lee stepped forward from the side and nodded solemnly. "Xiao Chun, your method is certainly creative," he said carefully. He admitted he'd never seen anyone even attempt something so bold. But he agreed with Danny. The risks were just too high to ignore. I began to explain that this wasn't just any ordinary electric welding. I started breaking down the hardness levels of the material itself. I explained the specific properties of the welding torch I was using. It wasn't just about melting metal, it was about the chemistry of the bond. I told them I used high-strength steel wire for this gear, reaching a hardness of 62 HRC. Master Lee stood there stunned, his brain working overtime to process the math. He was desperately trying to visualize the technical specs I just laid out. Danny was in the same boat, frozen in place and muttering under his breath. He kept repeating it, 62 HRC. He really means 62 HRC. The structural integrity of that kind of energy is immense. Standard high-strength steel for these gears usually sits between 60 and 70. He looked like he'd seen a ghost and whispered, "Mamma mia." It was a perfect fit for the machine's requirements. The realization hit both of them at almost the exact same moment. Danny and Master Lee felt a massive wave of shock crash over them. A cold numbness crawled up their spines like ice water being poured down their backs. They looked at me like I was a monster. My industrial design skills were beyond their imagination. It's one thing to be good at military tech, but my grasp of industrial manufacturing was terrifying. I had already calculated every single variable with pinpoint precision. To put it bluntly, Danny thought I wasn't even human anymore. He felt like an idiot for doubting me, wondering how he had the nerve to question my genius. Why would I even bother? Honestly, I didn't want to see anyone right then. Masterly was clearly feeling the exact same way. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but he hesitated, looking ridiculous and indecisive. I looked at him with curiosity and asked, Masterly, do you have another doubt? It's not a doubt exactly. I just don't know how to put it, he stammered, squirming for a moment. Finally, he spoke up weakly. I just thought of another potential problem with the link. He explained that the gear assembly is essentially being manufactured twice. He worried that after a period of fatigue, it would easily snap at the interface point. But I assume you've already thought of a solution for that, right? He asked me. I just smiled and said, I understand. You're talking about the stress distribution, right? That's a simple fix. I explained that once the gear is repaired, we'd use integral tempering and natural cooling. Then, a final oil quench would release the surface tension on the repaired section. That way, the internal stress vanishes and the interface fracture he feared would never happen. Masterly stood there in the workshop, completely paralyzed. He stayed rooted to the spot, a look of profound shock in his eyes. I had clearly thought of every single detail from the very beginning. This was supposed to be his field of expertise, yet I was proving to be the true master. The depth of my technical knowledge was nothing short of terrifying to him. Standing to the side, Chu Beiwei watched closely, realizing just how elite my skills really were. I laid out every key technical point, and Chu Beiwei couldn't stop stealing glances at me. I could see the admiration practically sparkling in her eyes. To her, this partnership was unstoppable. No matter the obstacle, I would always deliver a total slaughter. I picked up the steel welding torch and began the precision turning on the gear. A sharp, endless screech filled the room as sparks flew everywhere, forcing everyone to squint. Li Daniu watched the angle of my blade with intense focus. He was secretly marveling at the way I manipulated the machinery. He had never seen anyone handle a lathe the way I did. It was clear to him that my method significantly boosted the precision of the key components. My technique was skillful, fluid, and incredibly efficient. My manual dexterity was on a completely different level. He finally believed it. I really was a genius. I was a genius among geniuses, and he started thinking about his own future. He thought about how amazing it would be to keep following a big shot like me. It was the kind of opportunity that could bring honor to his entire family line. Half an hour later, I finished turning the gear. The entire assembly looked exactly like the original part. Unless you looked with a microscope, you'd swear it came straight from the factory. Li Daniu and Masterly stared in awe as I prepared for the final step. It was time to install the gear and restore the system. I poured every ounce of my focus into that single concept. The components began to slot perfectly into their designated sections. Every individual part of the machine was coming together. It all came down to pure technique. The sequence and the structural integrity had to be flawless. Even the slightest environmental factor could ruin the final result. I made sure to master every single variable within my control. I didn't miss a beat as I worked through the complex assembly. My movements were fluid, born from years of deep familiarity. I ignored everything happening outside of my workspace. I left all the flashy, unnecessary movements behind. More workers crowded around to watch me, completely forgetting their own tasks. They whispered praises, their eyes wide with disbelief at what they were seeing. I handled the rhythm of the machinery like a master conductor. My control over the smallest details of this machine was staggering. Looking at my hands, you wouldn't see the rough calluses of a laborer, yet they moved with the precision of someone with decades of manual experience. Suddenly, one of the veteran workers stopped mid-sentence and scratched his head. He muttered that the installation sequence I was using looked impossibly difficult. He looked at me and wondered aloud. Could he actually be making a mistake? The guys who actually knew machinery installation started talking. They nodded and turned to Ladaniu, their team leader, for answers. Even Ladaniu, with all his experience, had a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He remembered the restoration steps Zhang Yunlan had used before. He kept his concerns to himself and addressed the other workers. He told my fellow laborers to stay quiet. It's normal for ordinary people like us to not understand my methods, he said. They watched in silence, even as my installation grew stranger by the second. The confusion written on their faces only continued to grow. Wang Wu muttered to himself, watching my every move. If that machine actually starts up, he whispered, it'll probably break down right on the spot. But Su Beiwei never doubted me for a single second. I tightened the final screw with a firm twist of the wrench. Su Beiwei had already moved toward the vacuum absorption machine. She stood by the dedicated three-phase switch, knowing exactly what to do. The current hummed as the switch closed, and I reached for the green start button. I pressed it down firmly. A smooth, steady roar suddenly filled the room, making everyone jump. Wang Wu's face turned pale the moment he realized the machine wasn't breaking. This is impossible. That installation order was completely wrong, Wang Wu stammered. I waited for the gears to settle before explaining my process with patience. During the restoration, I had decided to run a small, calculated test. I wanted to see if I could push the machine's precision with a slight modification. Naturally, that meant the installation order had to change. Wang Wu's face twisted into a knot, his chin trembling uncontrollably. He started making these strange, intermittent choking sounds. I had just repaired and upgraded a high-precision imported instrument in minutes. Ladaniu and the others looked like their brains had just short-circuited. Li Sifu took it better than the rest, wondering if I could revolutionize bullet materials next. He already knew I had a special gift for machinery, even if this was a bit extreme. I looked at the stunned crowd and flashed a confident smile. I turned to Ladaniu and the others, suggesting we give the machine a real test run. They slowly snapped out of their daze and got to work. Minutes later, a collective gasp echoed through the entire factory floor. The precision of the machine hadn't just improved, it had multiplied. "This is it," someone whispered, "the most advanced vacuum machine on the planet." Ladanius shook his head, saying he'd never seen anything like this in all his years. He couldn't believe a human could manually modify precision tech with such ease. I took the warm water Zhang Yunlan handed me and downed 2 large gulps. I stretched out my neck and arms to work out the stiffness. Then, I asked a question as casually as I could. "Li Sifu, when will our Type 19 rocket production line be ready?" A flicker of helplessness crossed Li Sifu's eyes as he considered the timeline. The war of liberation is still raging, and the frontline troops are desperate. They are critically low on bullets and firearms right now. Half the factory staff is already working overtime around the clock. Every hand we have is focused on churning out ammo and rifles. Because of that, the rocket production line is severely understaffed. I estimate it will take at least another half a month to start production. I nodded slowly and replied, "I see." An hour later, I had already cleared the bottlenecks on the rocket line. With the technical issues resolved, I headed back to the workshop. I walked into Workshop 17 with Zhang Yunlan right behind me. A blast of hot air hit my face the moment I opened the door. It was sweltering inside, so I quickly peeled off my heavy cotton coat. I hung it over the back of my chair and sat down. I grabbed a pen and a fresh stack of paper immediately. My hand flew across the page as I began to draft the new designs. Suddenly, that familiar mechanical voice echoed in my mind. "Host detected." The system began authorizing the development of the bullet production line. A massive wave of scientific knowledge surged into my mind. This upgrade cost me 1,000 research points, right after the Type 19 rocket project. Up until this moment, my points had been scattered across various tasks. I had spent a total of 3,500 research points so far. Now, I was focusing everything on the mechanics of this new line. The bullet line consumed 1,000 points, leaving me with exactly 2,000. Actually, I had 1,500 points left after the final calculations. I decided to save them for even more powerful equipment later on. I began to write like a man possessed. I quickly filled page after page with complex technical drafts. Zhang Yunlan leaned in curiously to see what I was working on. She squinted, reading the very first line of my notes. High polymer component ratios and layered design. The sheer complexity of the formulas made her head spin. Zhang Yunlan's nerves suddenly tensed up, and she silently took a step back. She didn't even dare to speak out loud and disturb me. For the next few hours, I became the most focused designer in the country. I handled the entire design process completely on my own. Zhang Yunlan stayed by my side, quietly organizing my drafts and handling the trivial work. Sometimes, I would pause to reflect on the deeper meaning of my work. Zhang Yunlan kept staring at the blueprints I was drafting, but the result was always the same for her. She recognized the individual words, but they meant nothing when put together. She started to doubt herself, wondering how I could be this brilliant. We studied in the same places, yet I made her feel like a complete amateur. She stood there, realizing she didn't understand a single thing. I possessed an invisible edge that kept me miles ahead of everyone else. She watched me with a burning curiosity, wanting to uncover my secrets. Later that afternoon, a military jeep pulled up to the factory. It rolled through the main gates of the armament plant. The sentries took one look at the passengers and stood at attention. They let the vehicle pass without saying a single word. The jeep drove straight to the heart of the facility. It screeched to a halt right in front of the factory director's office. Director Fu heard the noise, looked through the glass, and went pale. He scrambled outside to welcome the visitors immediately. 2 figures in crisp military uniforms stepped out of the car at the same time. They marched toward the office with heavy, rhythmic footsteps. One of them was a prominent member of a very powerful family. The first man was burly, carrying a calm aura and piercing eyes. Then there was the other person. She wasn't quite as tall as her companion, but she possessed a sharp, internal charm. Every gesture she made carried a faint, lethal edge. Every step she took felt heavy and deliberate. The ground beneath her feet seemed to groan. It couldn't handle the cold, bloody pressure radiating from her. These 2 didn't even have to do anything. Their mere presence made people look away in pure terror. Director Fu hurried toward them. "Commander Xiao, Your Excellence, you honor us with this visit. My humble factory is brightened by your presence. Please, come inside." I knew Director Fu was no rookie. He dealt with plenty of heavy hitters. He was clearly very familiar with these 2. After a quick exchange of formal pleasantries, he gestured for both of them to follow him. They stepped into the private office. Commander Xiao let out a sharp laugh. "Cut the act, old Fu. There's no need to be so stiff with me." This time, Commander Xiao and I came to San Francisco City. mainly to see Chun-Zhe. Director Fu nodded and said, "He should be at Factory 17. I'll have someone call him." He gestured toward a returning student standing nearby named Wang Yikai. "You, go to Factory 17 and get Chun-Zhe." Wang Yikai had been distracted and out of it for the last few days. He was just wandering the yard to clear his head when he heard a VIP had arrived. He didn't expect to be assigned a task the moment he showed up to watch. Hearing my name made him grit his teeth in pure frustration. It felt like a knife to his gut, but he couldn't disobey the director's orders. He nodded and was about to leave when another voice rang out. "Don't rush, young man, in case Chun-Zhe is in the middle of research. Wait a moment. It doesn't matter if we wait until he's finished." Wang Yikai turned his head to see who was speaking. It was Commander Xiao. The moment their eyes met, a chill ran down his spine. He immediately straightened his posture and answered with total respect. "Yes, sir." Wang Yikai clenched his fists tight inside his sleeves. His mood was rotting. He couldn't understand why his luck was this bad today. I had only developed a rocket launcher that could reach 300 meters. Even if it was powerful, why would a high-level figure treat me with such caution? What exactly gave me that kind of leverage? Wang Yikai hurried off, while Director Fu smiled and gestured toward the commanders. "Please, come inside." They entered the office one after another to wait for my arrival. They leaned back on the sofa, chatting casually to pass the time. Suddenly, Commander Long spoke up with a serious expression. "Director Fu, the frontline units are burning through ammunition at an incredible rate." Director Fu sighed, complaining that several big shots had already called him today. With a bitter look, he said, "Commander Long, the factory's supply is limited. We get less than 5 tons of casings a week, capping us at 1,000,000 bullets. To produce more ammunition, we simply need more raw materials." Commander Xiao sat to the side, deep in thought about the logistics. Copper mining equipment is scarce across the country right now. Increasing the supply of casings in the short term will be nearly impossible. Director Fu shook his head, knowing there was no other way around it. The factory had already been desperately trying to find an alternative. They had even attempted to use iron for the shell casings. But using iron instead of copper for the hunt was proving to be a failure. We tried replacing copper casings, but the results were a disaster. The outcome was far from satisfactory. Iron rusts way too easily. Its hard texture causes severe wear and tear on the gun barrels. It was even causing frequent barrel explosions. The commander of the civil guard sat there in silence. He furrowed his brow, deep in frustration. Was it true that no material could actually handle the pressure? Was there really nothing that could replace copper bullets? Suddenly, a voice rang out from outside the door. "You can use plastic to manufacture bullets too." Commander Long and the others quickly snapped their heads toward the door. I stood there, reporting for duty with a calm expression. Director Fu laughed and told me to get inside. I already knew Vice Commander Xiao, but the other face was new. That had to be the legendary Commander Long. In the Jianzhou area, his name is known by every single household. People revere him as a true god of war. Just by looking at him, I could feel his overwhelming, divine aura. But when he looked at me, a warm, gentle smile appeared on his face. "Little Chun, you're not interrupting at all. Keep up the good work." As he said this, he reached out a large hand covered in thick calluses. I quickly extended both of my hands and gave him a firm shake. "Once you finish those small designs, it's better if you don't overwork yourself. Sit down, let's talk," Commander Long said, gesturing for me to take a seat. "Old Xiao hasn't stopped praising you in front of me, and I've finally met you. In the mission to suppress the bandits at Irving Ridge, you used fuel-air bombs. Those armor-piercing rounds wiped out nearly 8,000 bandits. Because of you, the people of the Xioxalan region can finally live in peace. You've achieved a great merit, and the request for your commendation is already in. The awards for the graphite rockets and the Irving Ridge operation are being processed." I had heard that Commander Long was a cold, iron-blooded general. They said he rarely smiled, yet he was being incredibly kind to me. I felt a bit flattered, and hearing about the upcoming awards left me stunned. "Commander Long, you praise me too much," I replied modestly. "The credit belongs to everyone. Every link in the chain was vital." Commander Long's eyes brightened as he looked at me. "Old Xiao, old Lu, you were right about him. Humble, polite, and dedicated to the cause. I like this kid. Rewarding merit is the only way to keep the troops' fighting spirit alive. By the way, when you were at the door just now, you mentioned something. You said there are materials that can replace standard bullet casings." The moment he brought it up, the entire room went silent. Our insufficient bullet production was a crisis that needed an urgent solution. If I really had a way to solve it, it would be a miracle for the war effort. Before I could speak, Vice Commander Xiao stepped in to explain the gravity of the situation. "Chun-Zhe, our frontline troops are currently facing a severe ammunition shortage. In some of our most critical battles, the situation is desperate. Each frontline soldier can only be issued 3 to 5 bullets, and the number of bullets our factories can produce is dropping. It's all tied to our copper supply, and China is severely lacking in copper mines. Our domestic copper production is extremely low. That means bullet production can't even come close to meeting the Army's needs. If there really is a material that can replace copper for manufacturing bullets, then the Waxia Army could finally go on the offensive." We could skyrocket our combat effectiveness and slash our casualty rates, Vice Commander Xiao said. Commander Long looked at me with a glimmer of hope, his posture tense with anticipation. They all knew that a breakthrough here was more than just engineering. A single R&D worker could change the fate of every soldier on the battlefield. Maybe I had just mentioned it in passing, but they believed I had the ability to pull it off. There was still a massive gap between a theoretical idea and actual research. But looking at their faces, I could see they were all clinging to a shred of hope. If I failed to deliver now, the momentum I had built would vanish instantly. Under their intense gaze, I spoke seriously. Copper bullets have high hardness. At the same time, they possess excellent ductility and natural lubricity. This allows the bullet to engage perfectly with the rifling under the gunpowder's pressure. It maximizes the thrust of the explosion while maintaining structural integrity. Copper casings are also incredibly durable and resistant to the elements. They have a strong resistance to environmental wear and tear. They withstand corrosion and the dehydration process during storage. The oxidation process is slow, even in less than ideal conditions. They can survive in a hostile environment for a very long time. If we want to replace copper, the new material must meet these exact standards. And as it happens, there is one material that fits these characteristics perfectly. Commander Long and Vice Commander Xiao leaned their bodies forward in unison. Their eyes were fixed on me, not even daring to blink for a second. My explanation proved that I had a profound, technical understanding of ballistics. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop as they waited for the name. I knew exactly what I was doing, and I was ready to reveal the solution. I couldn't help but speak up. The Vice Commander looked at me expectantly. I looked back at him and the Commander. Their hearts skipped a beat, praying I wasn't about to suggest what they already had. A platoon had once tested a batch of aluminum bullets. The results had been absolutely unbearable. The air in the room suddenly grew tense as I spoke up clearly. There are actually several ways to replace copper bullets, I explained. We have options like copper-coated steel casings and steel-on-steel casings. Then there are painted steel casings, which are commonly used. They don't rust easily for a few years, they're cheap, and they perform well. But these alternatives still share the same core flaws as copper. The weight is an issue, and the manufacturing costs remain high. Even after 10 years of storage, oxidation still ruins them. But if we use new megacarbon materials, we never have to worry about that. They outperform every standard bullet used in modern urban combat. Beyond just high-quality specs, this material offers even more advantages. The room went silent as I dropped the technical term. Megacarbon materials? The Commander repeated, confused. What exactly is that? They asked, so I began to explain. I spoke plainly. It's a non-metallic polymer material, commonly known as plastic. Plastic. The commanders and officers were stunned, shouting the word in unison. Their eyes went wide, and their gazes grew clouded with confusion. Their expressions turned dull. After all, plastic wasn't exactly a rare sight to them. They knew it from radio covers and sewing machine thread boxes. It was in the back of every TV and the celluloid used in camera film. But using plastic to manufacture ammunition? The very idea was enough to shatter their entire worldview. It sounded outrageous, and the Commander never expected me to suggest such a thing. Stop joking, Shinzei, he said. How could plastic possibly be used for bullets? That stuff is too soft and can't handle high temperatures. The barrel would explode, or worse, the plastic would melt and glue itself to the gun. I didn't flinch at his skepticism and began to explain patiently. There are many types of plastic, I said. The ones you see now are nylon, celluloid, and PVC. But every plastic has its own unique characteristics. Megacarbon is a rare variant with incredible mechanical properties and heat resistance. It can withstand extreme impact and immense pressure. It resists corrosion and offers perfect processing capabilities for manufacturing. When mixed with ceramic powder and other polymers, along with specific stabilizers, its overall performance becomes even stronger. It is the perfect new material for manufacturing ammunition. My resonant voice shook the three men to their core. It was as if a high-magnitude hurricane had swept through their brains. They looked like they were having seizures from hearing such alien concepts. No normal person could ever come up with something like this. Master Wang grew visibly excited as he realized I was playing at a whole different level. This megacarbon casing surpassed everything he knew. It was simply too amazing. I had opened the door to a new world for them, so I paused to let them process it. Because these megacarbon casings weigh 30% less than traditional ones, our soldiers won't be weighed down by their standard ammo load anymore. We can use that saved weight for other essentials. Extra rations or gear will significantly boost their combat endurance. But that's not all. The production cost is 60% lower than traditional copper bullets. In some cases, it's 70% cheaper than the world's most common rounds. It even beats copper-coated steel by 20% while improving accuracy. For the same budget, we can now supply our army with massive amounts of ammunition. This megacarbon casing also boasts an incredibly long shelf life. Traditional copper or copper-coated steel rounds only last 20 to 30 years at most. They are extremely sensitive to temperature changes. Humidity and extreme weather eventually cause the metal to corrode and oxidize. But with megacarbon casings, we never have to worry about rust or oxidation again.